Is a major thunderstorm warning in effect, so I hope your cars are not parked on the street because we might be seeing some penny-size hail here in the next few minutes. And if you are, you're excused if you want to run out and get inside the parking garage. We've got 4 items on our agenda tonight for any members of the public who might be here, and I don't see anybody who doesn't know the routine, but this is a work session, so our procedure is a little more informal. We will have public comment after each one of these items, as well as public comment on anything that's not on our agenda at the very end of the meeting. I'll call the council's attention to the agenda for kind of time allocation purposes. We've got 4 items. The first one I think will go faster than the remaining 3, but the remaining 3 are very substantive and we could spend all night on any one of them. I would not recommend that. But if we, for very rough budgeting time or purposes, try to spend maybe 30 minutes on the first one and an hour on each of the remaining, that would still be a 3.5-hour meeting. It's 5:30. That would put us out by around 9 o'clock. That's up to you completely. And Chris Kukulski is not here. It's Kevin, which usually means we got about a half-hour meeting. But I think that's going to be tough to squeeze in tonight. So he's our good luck charm. So anyway, I just mentioned that, and if we could maybe aim for that as a target, that might be useful. So anyway, Kevin, Chris is not here with us this evening, but if you want to make any introductory comments before we jump into the first item, this is your opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Mayor and Council. I don't have anything to report tonight, so I think we'll just jump in. Deb Billings is going to do the report on the first one, the AT&T lease, and we'll just get started.
Great. Public Works Director Debbie Melling.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I will try to stick within my allotted time. All right, so this really is an item that I just am looking for feedback. I don't have, I don't have any preconceived notions of where we're going to end on this. I just wanted to bring it and see what the thoughts are that we're going to get back here. So the AT&T has asked us to consider a lease for a cell tower at the location I've shown here on the red, with the red X. It's on the west side of the parking lot on the south side of Shiloh Conservation Area. So obviously today, south of there doesn't look too fancy, but hopefully here in a couple years, we have a West End Reservoir sitting there. So if you can picture it, the West End Reservoir would be just south of where we're looking here. And I didn't turn this on. So I'm going to jump through these pretty quickly, but just go through the location, why they want it there, type of facility, we have options there, and some offers as far as the lease rate and some agreements. And then we'll talk about, I guess, where to go from here. So the location that they sent me is within this search ring. When AT&T looks for a new location, they have a search ring that it has to be within. This is it. So we don't have a lot of options for how far we can go. I had kind of considered somewhere up in the northwest portion of Shiloh Conservation, but they can't get that far with what they're looking for here. So this is where the options are. They sent me these 3 pictures, and I sent them all out in the packet. So that first one is a very typical monopole. The second one is a water tower. It's a cell tower that looks like a water tower, and the third one is a monopine. We did talk about flagpoles. We talked about a lookout tower. Talked about a couple of different options, and I can go through that. They all have some issues. You know, the flagpole has to have internal antennas, so they're shorter. They can't put as many in there, so they need more of them. So if we look at some of these options, there's just some thoughts they have on each one of them. So the lease rate they're offering is about $1,000 a month. We're sitting at 1,000 right now. I do have someone reviewing that number. The way they come to that is there's an equation based on our population. The Bureau of Land Management has guidance for it, and then it's all based on population, so that's what they tend to use as a guideline. They said within Montana, Wyoming, this area, $1,000 is pretty much what they offer everybody. I do have someone reviewing that number, someone that kind of works in the industry. So I'm going to see what they tell me, how close that really is to an offer that we should be looking at. There's an escalation of 2% per year. The one question that came up today is, could we have them build us a bathroom or something? We've been looking for a way to get a bathroom at that Shiloh Conservation Area for a while. They said, sure, we could do a lease abatement. Anything you want to talk about, we could talk about. Do a lease abatement so we don't get all our lease for the first few years. And then they could build this for us. And when it's paid back, then we would get the total amount of the lease. So there are some options. They're open to some of those ideas. There are no restrictions on what that money can be used for. So unlike a lot of our funding sources, water, sewer, street maintenance, storm drain, all of that, this doesn't have any conditions on it. So it gives us a lot more flexibility than we normally have. It would be a 30-year minimum, and there's a co-location fee. So anybody that goes on to that tower with them would pay them a certain amount, and we would get probably 10% of whatever that is. So there's potential for more money there as well. So as far as approving or disapproving, I just put a few, and then I was going to say the agreement is also under review by another organization that does nothing but these agreements. So they're taking a look for us. As far as approving or disapproving, I just added some things here. Yes, it's some revenue with a lot of opportunity for it. It does improve self-service in this area, which is what we're looking for. Our citizens would probably appreciate that. FirstNet, AT&T is the contractor for FirstNet. And I'm sure the chiefs could tell you a lot more about this, but it is the emergency response network. So when they have to use cell service, they get first dibs at this network. So this is that network. Cons are obviously the visual, the use of the property, we're tying it up for something. And that's really what I came across. So I just wanted to talk through these items with you. Can go back to any of these slides.
Okay, questions? We'll start down here. Councilmember Boyette, Ronnie, Purington.
Is there any restrictions for the number within a mile or a half? I know there's a cell tower south of that on Shiloh down by Hesper, and I didn't know, is there any regulations about how close they need to be or not be?
Not that I know of. It would be an industry issue. The other thing is there's some zoning, and Nicole's right here. I know there's a zoning component of this that will come afterwards. It's not a zone change, but there are some zoning things that will need to be looked at if this is decided. But I don't think there's anything. I did ask them about interference from the substation that's right there and some of those things, and they didn't seem concerned about anything in the area.
Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. So a number of constituents did reach out to me today because they did see this, and I posted it on social media asking people if this is what they wanted. So several of the things that were sent to me in regard to these types of cell towers and the kind of revenue they bring back, and I think that they are a good. I think they're great for the city to partner with and use them for revenue sources, but I think $1,000 a month is ridiculously low. Total revenues of the three largest cell tower companies in 2019, $14.4 billion. Total revenues of the four largest wireless carriers in 2019, $242.2 billion. The average monthly subtenant co-locator rent that the cell tower, so for example, AT&T would get, the average monthly rent they would get from the co-locator is $1,920 to $2,972. The average monthly revenues that a cell tower generates per year, $70,655. 421.7 million cell phones were sold in the U.S. in 2019. 284.7 million smartphones were sold in the U.S. in 2019. So I think $1,000 is really low. Just put it out there. What I've heard is common practice is about $2,500 a month with a 15% increase every 5 years. So just giving you my feedback. So thank you.
there's someone in Colorado and another one in California, and they basically keep their finger on the pulse of all this. And that's what we're having them review right now, is kind of tell us if we're in the ballpark or not.
And
So I
that's where
appreciate that.
that's similar to where my information came from, so.
Okay,
Yep,
great.
thank you.
Councilmember Purinton.
Thank you. So on the diagram that you had where it's going to be located within the conservation area, so that right there is Shiloh Road going north-south, correct?
Right.
And then you said the cell tower would be, it's closer to, what is that, Knife River right now?
Right.
So is it
Right.
on that side of the road?
It's on the north side of the road, just where that push pin is, so it's right next to our parking lot. There's a parking lot on the south side of
Right.
the conservation area. It would sit right to the west of that.
Is there anything that we're going to put right there?
We are not. That's really Shiloh Conservation Area is a conservation area, and that was the goal of it, was to have some, beyond just the stormwater treatment, to have some wetlands and to have some native area out there. This is a 50 by 50 square. So it would fit pretty close within there. It's not a huge space, but basically that's what we have as native vegetation in that area. That is the plan for it.
And the pine wouldn't exactly fit the decor there.
Yeah, the pine doesn't really fit in there.
We need a different tree.
No,
Okay, thank you.
I was looking for options.
The Parks Department is thinking of planting some giant sequoias there, however, so
Fit in fine then.
as long as they grow very quickly, it'll pass perfect. Back to this end, Councilmember Shaw and Nice.
Thank you. Debbie, it seems like what you're kind of just looking for our feedback. So I'll say my feedback is my major concern is the visual impact that this will have, which I think you share. So the monopine, I was going to ask if you can elaborate on what that is. Is that, it's like an artificial tree of some kind? And other than that, I think this water tower is an interesting idea. You were mentioning just before the meeting that maybe we could do some kind of art on it or something, which I think could be kind of cool.
Thank you for
Councilmember-
the reminder, yes. They said we could have a hand in the design of whatever we wanted to put up there. It doesn't have to just say Billings or something. We could do something kind of unique with it.
Could you explain what the monopine is, though, real quick?
It's metallic, it's just a metal pole, and then it's got the faux branches. Yeah. Up close, it doesn't look like a pine tree.
Councilmember Nice.
Thank you, Mayor. And Debbie, thank you for responding to my emails on this. And first of all, I like the bathroom idea. We were out there and visited. It's a great place to walk around and stuff. But, if you need your restroom, you got to run to one of the restaurants or something like that. So I think that'd be good to negotiate with them and talk about that. As far as the lease amounts and stuff, I hope that information comes back. I don't like the water tower. That's just my preference. I don't like the single tower. I mean, again, visual is my concern. And the tree would probably be the next best option. There are other things out there. I would encourage some of the council members to take a look and go online and look to see what kind of fake things they make. But if they planted more trees, or we had some more trees planted, I know it would still stick out for a long time. Those trees don't grow overnight, but that would eventually, over time, looking long-term, it would just be a part of the grove, and you would, maybe the tallest of the grove, because it's 150 feet, but at least it would kind of fit within a grove there. So that would be my suggestions on as far as if those are only three options, I would prefer the tree, but also have trees planted along with it so they would grow over time.
Okay.
Debbie, my comments are along those lines, that we should ask them for detailed simulations. They're used to creating with Photoshop. They put the actual product in that location. You can get a little better realistic sense. So they're used to doing that, and there's no reason not to. I like the water tank or the tree over the pole personally, just because they will tend with time to kind of blend in. But those simulations might be a little surprising, because I don't think these are accurate. These are not those. For example, the pine tree is probably not 150 foot. 150 tower is huge.
It's huge.
Just huge. And those buildings are typically 10 to 12 feet. And if you just kind of eyeball it up, I think that's probably about 8 or 9 of those buildings, maybe 10 of those buildings. So might be 100, at the most 120 feet. So that's quite a ways from 150 feet. The tower is also not a cell tower. It's got the pipe going up the middle. That's a real water tower. And so in rough, and the way those antennas are, they're vertical, they're not horizontal. And so an actual tower, or I mean a faux tower might look a lot different from that and might not have the signage capacity that we were thinking of, or pretty mural. So all the more reason to get them to give us some detail. About the trees look pretty good. Where there are other trees, back to Councilmember Neese's point, most people drive by the one at Collin and Shiloh frequently. There's one right off there. It's shorter. It's probably only 50, 60 feet, but it blends in really well. Most people don't even know it's there. Out in Yellowstone Country Club, there's another one that, again, people pass all the time. But there are other trees, and your mind just kind of tunes it out when there are other trees there. I think we should discuss with them a shorter tower. I suspect they want to go all the way to the rims, and they have relatively few users. AT&T does. Verizon could never have a 150-foot tower because there'd be too much interference. They've got too many customers in that area, so they want more towers, but shorter towers. AT&T with fewer users can go really high, but that means that they can save a whole lot of money because they can cover a lot of area with a single tower. They could accomplish the same thing with more towers, more shorter towers. But each tower is a couple $100,000. And so they're saving a lot of money by only having one tower that, back to Councilmember Ronning's point, they could probably share with us as well. And then maybe we could move to the west. Given the height of this thing, I don't know, that search area seems artificially small, for a short tower. They're covering a huge area, and I don't know that it matters to us. Aesthetically is the big problem, but if they're going to be out here somewhere, they're going to affect the aesthetics somewhere else, and maybe better for us to get the revenue. And cell service is a very important public service, and so I don't personally have any great problem with locating on the property, especially if we can reduce the aesthetic concerns. But I guess those are my comments. Anything else from members of the council? Councilmember Treaky.
Do you know what generation of technology they're planning on putting in there?
They're going to do 5G capable. So it won't have 5G to start with, but they will have the capacity to put 5G on it.
The reason I ask is that 5G has a much shorter area than it actually covers. So,
So there's a couple of things I have. I did talk to him about a shorter pole. They're not interested in that in this location at this point. I think if we went back and said that's what you've got, then maybe that would be a different conversation. But today I asked the question and they said, no, we need 150. I do have a service area that they sent me late in the day. I just got it. I'll send it out to everybody. But this shows the gap in coverage and then what this would provide. So that might be an interesting bit of information to see where that service area is. I don't know how far it goes off the top of my head, but I can send that out.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Brown and Councilmember Ronnie also had her hand.
So Debbie, if they don't put it here, where else would they put it? On somebody's private property somewhere just nearby, or?
I would think they'll look in that area and probably talk to probably Knife River, see if they have land that they would use, or across the street there in that vacant area on the other side.
Okay, so somewhere in that general area, there's probably going to be a tower up there, and if it's on private property, they're probably not really going to care if it's just a big pole or what. Okay, and a follow-up, did you say that they had like a fire watch or something like that, faux kind of thing?
So Councilmember Neese asked about that, and I asked them the question, could you put like a watchtower up there so you could look over the whole area? And their first comment was, no, the liability is too high. So I can see that, I think, from.
Make a heck of a kid's slide from up there, though. Yeah.
We could look at a zip line, one end of a zip line.
Yeah, we've got water at the conservation area, so it's perfect. Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. I forgot to pass along. So the majority of people that commented on my post had shared that they didn't like the tree, but that the water tower, granted, this may not be what it looks like, and I really like the mayor's idea of getting something in that area and letting us see a picture of that, but that the water tower was seemed to be the favorite among the people that were commenting. The other question is there no space where the water treatment plant will end up being? Is that not something that they were interested in?
I think it's too far away. We don't own that corner up there. We're down further to the south. There might be another facility that they need down there, but this particular one is too far away.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And Debbie, I assume there's no, if they could move farther west, we don't need a real water tower at the reservoir, right? Or it would serve no actual function.
We are going to have water storage there, but it'll be ground level.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it wouldn't help.
Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'd like to ask the other council members, as far as the restroom that was mentioned, are you guys in favor, or would you like to see something like that? Is that, okay. I just wanted to make sure that Debbie got that would be something to pursue, so thank you.
Okay.
Yep, thank you. Generally, it'd be nice to keep the money in that area, in the conservation area, and the West End Reservoir where we need money for amenities. Councilmember Pearson?
Just as someone that grew up within a block of a water tower, I wouldn't be for the water tower. You got 5 spindles there, 5 legs, and I think some sort of mono something, your eyes will go through it eventually. You know, like you said, the one out by the country, I've never even seen that one, but I haven't looked either, so that's just my 2 cents on that one.
There you go, palm trees.
Yes. Councilmember Triki recommends a large palm tree.
I did Google those. Palm trees, cactuses. There were some interesting ones.
Maybe with neon lights on it as well.
Right.
Is that what you like? Okay, are we done with, do you have what you need to go forward with more discussions with them?
I think what I heard is that we're interested in pursuing an agreement. And that's the big thing. This is a 30-page agreement. We didn't want to spend a ton of time going back and forth if there wasn't interest. So I think there's enough interest to move forward at this point.
Okay, I see nodding
I
heads.
heard.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Do we need public comment?
Oh, yes, we do. Public comment on this. This will impact the public. If you'd like to be heard, please come forward, tell us your name, address. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tom Rupsis, 105 Legends Way. In 2015, a young enterprising attorney brought an issue before the Parks Board to put a cell tower at Terry Park. There's a lot of discussion on this, and what we realized was we don't have a public policy on how we're going to use our public lands, whether they're parks or pseudo-parks like the conservation area. At the time, we recommended that the city put a policy like that together. I think that would have come in very handy for this discussion tonight, and probably help Debbie along with her presentation if we'd already had that policy. I would encourage council to ask the city to develop that, to get on that right now, because these things are going to come to us more and more often, and it'd be better to have some black and white policy written down that we can refer to, and we don't have to have this conversation every time and be kind of at the whim of council. The only other comment I wanted to add is at the time that they were talking about a 75-foot tower, because a 75-foot tower comes with less zoning restrictions, and a 150-foot tower requires some type of, they can put 75-foot towers on private properties without any kind of special zoning, but if they wanted to put a 150-foot tower, they need some type of special approval. So the idea that they're going to just take this 150-foot tower and put it onto somebody else's private property, there might be an extra step there. I'm not sure if that's changed recently or not, but that's something to consider as well. So anyway, the last final note is that young enterprising attorney is now our mayor. So.
Really appreciate being called young 5 years ago. I'm not sure what's happened in the last 5 years. While we've got Nicole, Nicole, do you want to comment on zoning issues associated with a possible 150-foot or lower tower?
Okay, the zoning code update kept our existing regulations basically intact for wireless communication facilities, which says that any tower over 50 feet must be separated from another tower over 50 feet by 1 mile. That can be overridden by the council by granting a waiver to that requirement, but that has to be done through a special review application, and that it doesn't matter whether it's on public property or private property. If you have a 150-foot tower, it goes through special review.
Okay, thank you.
Which would be interesting, so you're specially reviewing your own tower.
Yeah, Councilmember.
Just like we did at this Terry Park fire station.
Councilmember Rewald has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, that green ground south of Shields,
Yes.
Is that in the county?
It is.
So what restrictions would they have if they wanted to put it in that parcel?
They're essentially the same in the county as far as permitting procedure, but it goes to the county commissioners as opposed to the city council.
Do they have the same 50-foot
Right,
mile
50 foot,
separation?
anything over 50 feet has to be separated. Now, if it's at 50 feet or lower, it can just go on this property or any of the surrounding commercially zoned properties.
So anything over 50 feet, like this one's supposed to be 150, there's nothing special?
It has to go through special review approval, either with the city, if it's in city limits, or in the county.
So, one follow-up, that if it goes to the county, it's a vote of 3 people. If it's a city, it's a vote of 11 people.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we'll continue back to public comment. Is there any further public comment on item number 1? Any further public comment on item number 1? Do not see any. So close the public comment period and close our discussion on item number 1. Move to item number 2, Police and Fire Center for Public Safety Management Implementation Update. We've got, Kevin, you want to just introduce this and call up one of the chiefs, I guess?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor and Council. Yeah, tonight we thought we'd just give you a quick update of where we're at with some of the CPSM recommendations by both the police chief and fire chief. So it looks like Police Chief St. John is up first, so I'll let him take it from here.
Mayor, Council, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Ripplin. 10,000-foot view on our progress on CPSM recommendations. If you recall, 102 for the police department. Most of those were internal things that wouldn't cost any money. We broke those down into 6 specific categories, dealing with our operations division, primarily our uniform, anything in a marked unit, investigations and evidence, professional standards, training, SROs, DVI, STEP volunteers, and then miscellaneous. Under operations, there were 19 total recommendations, and we have completed 5 of those. The rest are either underway or under review. 3 of them have transitioned from council decision to safety levy issue. So you already said you were going to move forward with it. Investigations, a lot of those are under review. Those generally are going to talk about some organizational changes, so haven't jumped into those yet. Professional standards, we have 8 completed. Of the 13, the rest are underway or under review. One of those is a safety levy decision. Anytime I mention that, you're talking people primarily, or a facility, and obviously that had to come from you initially. With our training officer hiring and PR, 21 of those. We have 5 completed. The rest are underway. Our volunteers, SROs, we have 1 completed. 1 safety levy issue there. And then miscellaneous with our facility, jail, succession planning, our organizational chart, relationship with IT, and policies and civilians. Those are all lumped together. 3 under review, and 1 is a safety levy issue. Probably the biggest thing that we have accomplished from the get-go is the full implementation of the body camera program. We are up and running with that right now. And as advertised, we're already having trouble with our storage. So we're trying to work through that. We have been working with the Communication Center and Chief Valdez's staff at 911. If you recall, a lot of the data entries would cause some of our skewed numbers and makes it look like the whole department's up resting at the same time when in fact they're doing reports or administrative work. Did implement some standalone software program, the track canine activity. Others, we chose not to do that because of cost and satisfied with what we have. We have implemented some specialized training, modified some of our professional standards report, and our policies are always being modified. Of a total of the recommendations, we have completed or have under review or underway 63 of them. That's 61% as we speak right now. And so we still continue with that. Obvious implementation of some of the bigger things is going to be contingent upon safety levy passage. Mayor?
Thank you, Chief. Questions, Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Chief. The organizational things on those, on there that are all under review, so are those being reviewed, or are they just set aside, not a priority? What's the status on that?
Well, some of them already been completed. Others need to wait to see if we get additional staffing because it requires adding supervisors so we can balance out, balance out our organization. And so if we don't get the additional staffing, then we're going to have to look at, how we're doing. We are a victim of flattening the organization for years, and we're out of whack. And that's what CPSM recognized. You have some of our supervisors, one in particular, is way over the 5 to 7 span of control that we want to have. You have the assistant chief overseeing animal control, for example. So I need additional personnel in order to balance that up. There are things that we have done, and it's been done already. And it's simply moving a position. The DVI position, for example, it was under patrol and should have been in detective. So on paper, we moved her over to detective. So check that box. Some of them are not feasible at this point. Moving SROs to detectives because they do the same work or should be doing the same work. Yes, they do. But our detectives get extra pay for being detectives. And our SROs will want the extra pay to be under detectives, and we're not budgeted to do that. So those are things that we're looking at.
So, I'm sorry, follow.
Go ahead.
So a lot of those internal organizational things are going to be kind of reliant on the public safety as well to really kind of be able to even implement those.
Absolutely. The initial plan put forth by my staff is that we are going to have a separate sergeant for SROs, essentially giving them 9. So they're independent. Supervisor, 1 for the traffic unit, 1 for the administrative to help with the hiring, the policies, procedures, and the internal affairs function. 1 to go to detectives to help supervise that outfit. And then a handful of detectives, handful of patrol officers of the 14 or so sworn personnel that the safety levy would allow us.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Chief, these are pretty well 10,000-foot observations. Does this exist in any sort of a written form with a more detailed breakdown that you would be able to share?
Certainly, just not tonight.
Okay, all right.
But I do have that, and we're making really good progress.
We'll wait for you. Go ahead. On down the way, Councilmember Purington and Ewald.
So just a couple of things, and that was what I was going to ask also. We're a little bit more specific on this public safety mill levy items that you were talking about. The other issue that we've heard a lot of, well, some have heard, various information and concerns from the general public. One is, why would we pass a public safety mill levy if we don't have jail space? And hire more officers if all they're going to do is write tickets and you're still going to have the concerns. And one of the other questions would be, would it behoove council to have the county attorney before us, as well as the sheriff before us, even though those are county positions, what they do affects Billings. I mean, they're involved with city stuff. And that was one thing that someone in law enforcement had mentioned. Do you realize how many cases the county attorney has and what those cases are, as well as the jail situation? Because my understanding is it is in flux. So would it behoove to have you, the county attorney, the sheriff, maybe even U.S. Marshals, because they're here looking for people, would it behoove us to have a meeting with these different individuals to get a clear picture?
Yeah, Councilmember, I don't think it would hurt, and certainly what you'd be doing is getting firsthand information of what they're dealing with. When you're getting it from me, it's essentially secondhand information and what we are experiencing. So they are the ones that are handling all of that. And certainly, I know both of them would be more than happy to visit with you about what the situation is and what they're dealing with. No issues there. To your first question, certainly the jail is problematic for everybody. We're working very hard to keep that population down. Last Thursday, the report was 544 inmates there. That's a new record, 544. And as you're well aware, that most of them, I mean, all of them need to be in. People that have, a couple warrants for running a red light, the minor possession stuff, they're not in there. Still dealing with Department of Corrections. They were doing a really nice job getting people out. I don't know what happened to get them up to 544, but that's a problem, most definitely. And we're continuing to work very hard to divert people out of the justice system. Therein lies your, sobering center discussion, your mental health discussion, your clean and sober housing, trying to get people out of there. But there are some bad people here doing bad things, and, the fact that we're catching them and putting them in jail is a good thing, too. What I would say is that I am not of the frame of mind to not go do what we need to do simply because another organization is having trouble. That would be remiss in our duties. I think that we do everything we can within our power to handle the issues we are, continue to try to solve that problem. It's another agency's issue that affects us. But I think that we would be remiss in our duty if we said, can't get anybody into jail, so I'm not going to put any more cops on. That's wrong. That is not what we're about. That's not what I'm about. We're going to, whatever resources you give us, we're going to go do what we do, and then we're going to make it work with the sheriff as best we can.
Thank you. Councilmember Ewell?
Thank you, Mayor. I got 3 questions here. I'll start with the easiest and go to the harder. So, are you gonna have cameras on your dogs?
I'm sorry, cameras on the dogs?
Yeah.
Hadn't planned on it.
That could probably be a good thing sometimes, couldn't it? Because they
Yeah,
get in where officers can't.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I know that it's out there. We really haven't discussed that. I'm not saying we can't do it. Right now, my goal is to get every officer outfitted, yet let alone the dogs.
Okay, that was the easy one.
Okay.
I think it's Becky, the civilian clerks person. Is that who it is for the police? The police clerks that work downstairs? Was it Becky?
Becky is our supervisor, yes.
Okay, she came to the task force and she says she's having problems hiring people and passed out blue hiring cards. And I gave 2 of them out at that Atonement Lutheran gathering we had. I mean, I told people about it. Do you know if they solved some of that hiring problem?
We have a brand new clerk on right now that's in training. I think they're still short 2 or 3. We just have a hard time with that position. It's salaries, it's the working conditions, specifically night shift. And what we find out is everybody, when they're interviewing, are going, yeah, they like the job. Do you understand you're going to work weekends and nights? Yes. And then when they get here, it's like, I didn't sign up for this. So we're having difficulties like everyone else. So I have asked her to get creative for part-time jobs. I mean, I think it'd be great for maybe a stay-at-home parent. Kids are in school during the day. I need something to do to come in and do some data and something like that, job share to help us get over the top. If you look at our CPSM, or I'm sorry, the safety levy ask, 4 clerical positions are in that 28 FTEs. And they would be in year 1 because they are so critical for our operation. And I hope you filled the card out because we'd love to have you.
So do they go up to the college up here for like night shift, or
Yep.
are they too young to do that?
No, I have a high school intern right now working, proudly sporting her temporary tattoos that she got at the fair. just do a wonderful job. We have a lot of vistas that come and help and do data for us on a wide variety of projects. So we throw the net wide. I know one comment was, and I'd have to double check on what our starting salary, but you had Wendy's offering $15 an hour, and I don't think we're offering $15 an hour for that. So, and it's just one of those things. We need to be competitive and need to continue to press on with our recruiting. And we're doing that not only on our civilian staff, but with our sworn as well. We're really trying to get aggressive, get creative, throw the net wide, throw it far, and see what we can do to get more people in the door.
All right, now the tough one. It's been published that there's 93 individuals costing the city $10 million, and I think like 2 years ago, it was 70 people costing, I don't know how many dollars. If you know the 93 people, how come we can't do something about it?
Well, again, council member, it goes to the back end. Enforcement's not the problem. It's what do we do with them? The jail is full. And when you're talking about these co-occurring mental illness and addiction issues, the jail's not the place for them. The ER is not the place for them. And right now, we are really trying to find those diversion programs to keep them out of there. Right now, it's just a revolving door. It was exacerbated by the pandemic because they knew, call them what you will, but they're not stupid. They're not going to jail. And so we continue to offend and offend. We get a ticket. They don't show up. They get a non-appearance warrant. Repeat. And so, we're trying to get a handle on that. So once we can come up with back-end solutions to, divert them out of that, then that's going to go down. That's going to go down. Obviously, in a perfect world, if we had unlimited jail space, those people aren't bothering you. But you're paying $110 a day for a city charge. And so it'll cost you money, and we're paying probably $15,000, a month now for people we have in there on city ordinance charges. So if we can find places, things to do, things to rehab, things to rehabilitate, and some of them need to go to jail, no doubt about it. Then we can turn that corner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for the chief? Kevin Eflin has a question for the chief or something else.
I'll ask him in private later, Just a couple of comments in regards, Councilmember Purrington, as far as the jail discussion, there are regular meetings with County Attorney Twito, some of the jail staff, administration there, and also the county commissioners trying to deal with that discussion and that issue. So we are meeting with them on a regular basis. Councilmember Ewalt, as far as the police clerks and the hiring of those, I've worked with the police department and HR. We're trying to come up with those solutions. We worked with the Teamster contract that we'll be bringing to you in the upcoming, I think week or 2 weeks on that to address some of those pay issues and other creative solutions. So we are aware of some of those and trying to work through those more diligently. And then part of that, 93 people, it's the hospitals, it's AMR, it's the police, it's the fire department, it's affecting, all those units there. And some of it you'll hear from Chief Valdez here shortly, I believe, on the priority-based dispatch that might help alleviate some of that front-end, issues if we get to that stage. So I think you'll hear a little bit more about that coming up shortly here.
Okay, thank you. That'll be a good segue to the chief, Chief Valdez, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to agree with you. I was expecting more of a written report as far as the list and how things were accomplished, kind of what the police priorities are, or what their items are. And I think, Chief, you mentioned some of those are the councils that we need to work on those and what those items were. So make sure, you hold us accountable to what we need to be doing as well. So I would appreciate that list as soon as you can to get that out to us. And I do have some concerns, about the jails and some of the things, but I'll just leave it at that. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor.
We'll ask Chief Valdez.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Pretty much along the same format as Chief St. John just did. last couple months, we've been pretty busy trying to implement these recommendations. We had 34, and what I did is basically just picked a handful that we felt was the greatest impact for our department and for our city. So this report is basically broken down into 4 categories. What's been implemented already, what's in progress, public safety mill levy ask, and then ones that deal with the collective bargaining agreement and those issues. So right off the bat, we'll just go right into recommendation number 20, which was priority dispatch that Kevin Iflin just stated. BFD should work with 911 Dispatch Center to implement response protocols that alter the BFD response mode when calls are determined to be minor or non-emergency. So we spoke about that briefly in June and what that would look like. And since we've had several meetings to include Dr. Dan Lewis, who's our medical director, we're at a stage now where we know what it looks like and we're ready to start implementing. So we'll be calling in more of the stakeholders from our community to attack that. The next one was the city of Billings should move to an ambulance provider service agreement with an ALS provider. This agreement should specify the terms and conditions for providing the services to the city. That's recommendation number 18. So essentially what we'd like to do is establish the priority dispatch first, get that up and running, and then incorporate the ambulance provider, whatever that looks like. We'll try to do the best to make it most advantageous for the city, whether that's a contract or an ordinance rewrite, one of the two. We did have a meeting, I believe it was last month, with AMR, and their regional manager came in from Portland, and we discussed our plans and what we were intending to do to have full transparency. They're on board. Obviously, didn't really have a choice, but we let them know what we were intending to do. The third part of that 3-pronged approach that I talked about back in June, this is part of the public safety mill levy ask, and the Billings Fire Department should consider the use of 2-person EMS squad units to handle EMS and non-emergency service calls. We anticipate, in conjunction with the priority dispatch with the MRT units, to help lower our call volume for the fire department. It's in particular as far as the EMS calls, which is specific to the CPSM report. Doesn't deal with anything else such as rescues or hazmat or anything like that. This is just to EMS. And again, this is based on whether the safety levy passes or not. But what we intend to do is send 2 folks to Spokane because they have a similar system to ours. I mean, essentially, they're twice the size of us, but it's uncanny how similar they are to us because they've been running the system for 7 years now, and they also have AMR in the system. So we're sending 2 folks out to study their program. If this passes, that way we won't have to reinvent the wheel. We'll have a good head start. Also, on the way back, they will be stopping in Missoula to study their mobile integrated health program, such as the CAHOOTS program in Oregon, or again, CARES, which is in Spokane. So they'll be studying that and bringing hopefully quite a bit of information for us back. Billings Fire Department should conduct a formal risk assessment that concentrates on the city's downtown, strip commercial establishments, big box occupancies, high-rise structures, and industrial and processing and institutional properties. If you remember, we were talking about a position specific to the Fire Prevention Bureau, and that's the DFM, or the Deputy Fire Marshal. This person would specialize in this in particular. So essentially, they're going to go out and meet with the property owners of targeted hazards in our community. In the process, they can discuss and fix any compliance issues, and also bring back valuable intelligence to us to help plan for those target hazards in case there's situations that do arise. Next, the City of Billings should increase its fire plans review, inspection, and permitting fees in order to recover the full cost of providing these services. This is the fire protection engineer that we talked about a couple months ago. This is a highly trained individual that would have to come outside of our organization, and they would deal strictly with developers in our community. Couple big things out of this is we feel that there's a potential to capture revenues from the fees that are charged for plans reviews that can stay in our community. And there's a potential to sustain that position through these fees also. The other piece of it is customer service. We can turn those plans reviews around much faster than sending them to Chicago, which is what we do now. And it takes a week to a week and a half before those reviews come back, which slows things down. So we feel like we can speed that up. So, and then lastly, the city of Billings should designate a city emergency manager, sorry, not Chris, city emergency manager from a key department, police, fire, city administrator's office, who is responsible for implementing the city's emergency management planning and operational efforts in cooperation with Yellowstone County. This, we're working with the county DS coordinator to see what that looks like, and we're actually going to be start meeting on this next week, I believe, to include Chief St. John, by the way. We have a meeting next week, so just so you know. So we'll get that process underway, and we'll stay tuned. We'll let you know what that looks like. That's what I have so far. The rest, like I said, the other recommendations are either implemented or they're CBA issues or in progress. So, end of report.
Great, thank you, Chief. I'll start you off with one, since we were talking about the 93 high users, frequent users last year that cost $10.3 million, or whatever it was. The cost of the Billings Fire Department response was not included in that because you had some problems with the data. It seems that would still be a critical component of that number, as well as AMR's response costs that were not included in that number. Can you get us those numbers, or get the police officers who put together that report to do an update? Is that feasible?
Sure. Are you looking just for a particular year or a trend, or?
No, just whatever was relevant to the study on the 93 frequent users. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yep.
Which I think covered the calendar year 2020, if I remember right.
Got it. Okay. Yep. Get that to you shortly.
Council Member Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, could you give me an example of what this, you'd send off to Chicago? What kind of a business? What is the scenario for that? Instead of us doing it here, you send it away?
Yeah, so we use a third-party provider. So I can't remember the name of the company that we use, but we've been using them now for probably, 10 years or so. We just don't have the capability in-house, and we feel that, we can capture that and keep that in our community. And the reason why I say that is over the last 6 years, we've sent roughly $87,000 per year worth of fees that could stay right here to this company in Chicago. So we'd like to keep that in-house, like I said, for customer service. It's better for the city of Billings to be able to have someone who can, if there's an issue that arises, they can go on site immediately and hopefully resolve the issue.
Councilmember Yakovich.
Thank you, Honor, Council. Chief, if you could help me out here with 1, 2, and 3, it seemed like a lot of that wrapped around AMR in one way or another. Could you give me just an idea 5 years from now, 7 years from now? What's your vision for implementation of what you just shared?
Sure. So the vision, obviously, the first part of that is going to the priority dispatch. And what that will enable us to do, provided that the ambulance provider can do this, which our current one can, they will take the alpha and, okay, so there's 5 categories of calls. There's alpha through echo. Alpha being your low acuity type calls, a stub toe, a tummy ache, something of that nature. Echo being your strokes, heart attacks, full-on CPRs. So an ambulance provider should be able to take care of the alpha and bravo calls, which would in effect lower the calls that we're going on. And we're hoping right off the bat to see about a 10% reduction in calls, with the ultimate goal of being about 25%. In conjunction with the MRT program, that would also augment the system to get our folks, our medics, ALS providers, or advanced life support providers to a scene faster, again, to augment the current system that we have in place. Hopefully that.
Your Honor, just, I know there's a lot of detail to that. I heard through some, the idea of we absorbing AMR. Is there any thought of that in the future?
Okay, so the issues that we're facing right now on a national scale is there's this huge shortage of paramedics in our country. It's just, no one can get around it. It's not a Billings Fire Department issue. It's not an AMR issue. It's everywhere. And what we're seeing is it's 2 years of hard, grueling school, because I went through it myself, with very little reward on the end. Most people tend to go to fire departments or hospital-based systems because it's more career-based, if you will. Unfortunately, and it's not the private provider's fault, they get used as a stepping stone, if you will, because it gains them the experience to get to a fire department or a hospital-based system on a helicopter or something of that nature. So we're seeing a big shortage, and in our particular system, which is no different than others, they're having trouble with recruitment and retention. And in the future, it's a possibility that we may have to look at that, 5, 6, 7 years down the road. And I think doing this process will help better prepare us for that in case that shoe gets dropped. We'll be ready.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese and Puritan?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, will you be getting to us a list of those 34 as far as what's been done? Just a summary,
You bet.
kind of what's our responsibility and what's being worked on. So thank you.
Yes.
Councilman Puritan?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. So did I understand you to say that the alpha calls would go to AMR?
Or whichever ambulance provider's here, yes. Alpha and
Because-
Bravo.
Okay, because the Echo would be the one that would need ambulance service,
Yeah, so
transportation.
yeah, I'm sorry I didn't make that clear, but we would both go to the Charlie, Delta and Echo type calls.
Okay, and then just following up what Councilmember Boyette was talking about, I think, was it in regard to the fire protection engineer? Is that okay, could you explain that? Because you lost me there. What are they doing in Chicago? What are we paying them money for?
So it's for plans review, so our developers, it's required that they have their plans reviewed for fire protection systems that are installed in commercial properties. And so what we've been doing over, a decade plus is sending that work to another community, and we feel like we can capture that and keep that here.
Thank you.
You bet. Sorry.
Thank you. Councilor Rewalt?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief. So that $87,000, you charge that back plus some to the contractors, right? So the Billings Fire Department isn't out any money.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. That's a good plan. So the other thing is, isn't there a state fire inspector that oversees all this stuff like it is in other states?
There is you're correct, there is an overriding, but this is what we do within our jurisdiction. We still have to have plans reviewed. It's a requirement that has to get done. So, but you're right, there is a.
Follow up, please. So who has top priority, the state inspector or the city inspector?
I'm under the impression that we have the authority because it's within our jurisdiction, because we don't, and say like in the BUFSA, any new development out there, commercial property, we don't have any say-so of that. That's where the state comes in.
Okay, because I've been talking with my son, and he says the state likes to step in, and sometimes it makes it kind of tough, but.
I like to think we have a pretty good relationship with our.
Okay, so if we got a state inspector, why do we send it to Chicago? Why don't we send it to the state inspector?
They don't have plans reviewers for the fire protection engineering part of it. They don't oversee that part. They see other parts of it, but not the fire suppression systems that go in them. Those are specialized.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Councilor Triki?
Again, thank you, Chief. My question, or what I'm wondering about is, as we get into the whole priority dispatch aspect of it, are you also working with the nonprofits, the Continuum of Care, Substance Abuse Connect, and stuff like that in order to figure, to work their services into the responses?
Absolutely. We just had a meeting with them. Derek Yeager, our 911 director, just had a meeting with that group last Thursday, I believe. Very positive and productive. Sound like we had an aligned vision. So again, stay tuned.
That's really great, because that's one of the biggest issues is figuring out
I would
who and
agree.
where. And
I would agree. And that other piece, when we send our folks to Spokane to go study that system out there, they're supposed to stop in Missoula and study that program and bring that information back to us. They've been running their program for about a year now, and it sounds like it's been pretty successful.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go to public comment on this item? Don't see any. Chief, thank you very much. Appreciate your efforts. We'll open up for public comment then. For anybody who would like to comment on item number 2, the police and fire CPSM implementation update, please give us your name and address and ask your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
I'm Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South. I actually was going to wait till the end to comment, but when I heard Chief St. John speak disrespectfully about a young lady that he has as an intern wearing tattoos and talk about her in a disrespectful way, and to see all of you non-responsive to that, and it seemed, and cajoling him, I decided to speak. For some 7 months now, I've been writing and speaking in person to the Billings Police Department, the Human Resources Commission, and you, the elected leaders of our community, about the encounter I had in December with an element of this community that I had not previously even thought about before, let alone encountered, and that is outlaw motorcycle gangs, specifically the Galloping Goose. I have identified the dangers of this group and others like it, that they pose to health, the honesty, and the safety of our community. I have questioned the relationship between this gang and the Billings Police Department, and I've provided evidence of a favored status given to the motorcycle clubs, including the motorcycle gangs, by the Billings Police Department, such that for years the police department has disregarded city law, city ordinances in order to approve runs like the Road Dog Toy Run and memorial runs through our city. I have given you evidence of ties between the Galloping Goose gang and local law enforcement. I have spoken and I have written so much. I have asked for your answers, and I've even asked you to challenge what I've said. And what has been your response? Aside from a few emails and phone calls and a couple personal visits hinting that something will be done, or that you all are taking my complaints and information seriously, there has been silence. A lot of silence from you and from Chief St. John. Silence as a response can come from a number of things, including a sense of peace, harmony, a sense of awe even. It can come from disinterest or lack of interest in what is being said. It could come from deep anger. Silence can be the response when something hidden, something no one wants to acknowledge, comes to light. And we can respond to silence out of fear. No one dared disturb the sound of silence, says Paul Simon. So I ask you, where does your silence come from? Where does your silence to all I have written, all I have spoken, and all I have asked answers for come from? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Here I will comment. My reaction to Chief St. John's comments about his intern were, I did not interpret that to be disrespectful in any way. I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but he had a smile. He was talking about a high schooler who had done a great job. That's how I interpreted his comments. a high schooler who'd gotten a tattoo at the state fair, which I think probably means a sticker. That was my interpretation. And I don't know that anybody else had a different interpretation, but if they did, it might have been because they had a great distrust and disrespect for the Billings Police Department, and it clouded their judgment. But that was my interpretation of the chief's comments. We haven't responded much to your comments, but my understanding is that that is in the works, and I suspect has been communicated to Catherine that that would be forthcoming, but I don't know that. So this would be an appropriate time probably to ask Kevin to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor and Council, and no fault of Chief St. John's. It's my responsibility. We have not sent out a response to Catherine Card's, accusations that I would say are patently false. Anecdotal connections of what she's trying to put together as being crime and corruption in the Billings Police Department. We do have a final draft ready to go out to council, and like I said, that is on me. That is not on Chief St. John. I've been the delay on that of getting that out to council, and we will do that shortly in response to Catherine Card's allegations, and they are strictly just allegations. And then also, I believe Councilmember Neese had followed up with a few questions today that we'll address in that same response.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Kevin, but we do definitely owe her a more detailed response, and I would personally acknowledge that anyway, so thank you very much for that. We'll look forward to that. We'd prefer not, it's just public comment now, but if you want to send us a further email on that, feel free.
More than public comment.
Yeah, well, that's kind of our privilege, I'm afraid, so.
I'm sorry, but you made statements about me.
Catherine, go ahead and follow up with, by email.
I have been.
Yeah, that's okay. We understand that. And I was making my comment. So your time is up. Catherine, please sit down. Okay, please sit down.
I expect your response to have specifics in it, because I gave you specific evidence, and I expect a specific response. Thank you.
Duly noted, and I would agree with your comment. I agree. Okay. Any other public comment on item number 2? Any other public comment on item number 2? Kevin.
Just back on a couple things to just clarify, on item number 2, we are working on a false alarm ordinance with both across the police and the fire department, and working on that we can bring to city council. So, we'll anticipate, bringing that forward at some point. The second thing I just want to kind of clarify, AMR, we certainly wouldn't recommend to council that we would want to ever take over ambulance services. I think what, Chief Valdez was referring to is that because of that, paramedic shortage throughout the country, workforce shortages, that, we might have to step in and help at some point or do things like that, but it certainly would never be our recommendation, other than a total collapse of the transport service system, that we would want to step in and take over that system, so.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that concludes item number 2. We'll move on to item number 3. Councilmember Yakowicz. If that's your preference.
I would motion for a break.
Okay, it's a little early, but okay. If that's the preference, we'll come back in approximately 7 minutes at 6:45. If that was jarring, I hit that. Our next item up is item number 3, zoning code update report on code implementation. Our planning director, Nicole Cromwell, is up. Nicole, it's all yours.
Wow, I got a promotion.
Oh, what did I
I'll have to
say,
tell
planning
Wyatt he's
director?
the zoning
Sorry.
coordinator.
You haven't heard yet.
I may call on him to answer some
Zoning
questions.
coordinator, I apologize. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this, as promised, is your first reporting period for the all brand spanking new zoning code for the city of Billings that you adopted and implemented February 25th. So we're going to go through the first 4 months. Your report also has a table that's attached that shows you what we've tracked as far as minor errors and little code reference bloops, and it's the blooper list. In other words, we have about 15 of those are very minor. And so those are in there, but we also have some other issues that we're tracking and monitoring that we'll come back to you at the 7-month reporting period with some ideas of how we can fix those or address those. So first, we started off with our growth policy. Then we got together and said we need to have better tools to implement our growth policy. And you did 5 public hearing sessions and 2 work sessions as part of this adoption. And part of that was this maintenance schedule for our new code. So this is our first report. So this code is really in its infancy. So this is its first baby steps as a new code. So we're reporting those errors, typos, and clarifications, and those implementation challenges that we have discovered. In case you don't know, we are in a building boom in Billings right now. More new construction permits have been issued in 2021 than any previous year back to 2013. So we are going great guns out there, and it's not just all single-family homes. It's also townhomes and apartments and commercial buildings. So we are in a building boom. So here is that errors and typos and clarifications. We have about 15 of those. We would ask the council at some future council regular meeting, at the end of the meeting, to initiate a housekeeping amendment so we can get those fixed in the code. We'll take that through the regular text amendment process, through the zoning commission, and then back to you for a final vote. So here are the issues that are worth monitoring, and we kind of group them into 3 categories. Intercode consistency. So this is just one part of 28 parts to the city code. And we started off, we knew we had to put the historic buildings code into a different section of the city code, and we did that. And we took some parts out of the site development code for parking, off-street parking, and put that into the zoning code. But that only dealt with 2 of our 27 companion codes. So we're going to dive deeper and look at each one of those different codes that we have to make sure that we are playing well with all of our code neighbors. One of those we've already had some experience with, the fire code and the zoning code are not playing well together necessarily, and so we figured we have to make some adjustments there, look at that more closely, come back to you with some more details on that at the 7-month report. Residential site design, there are several issues in there. I believe that you received a letter from the Home Builders Association earlier in July, I believe. And we have included those issues in this report to work with them further and discuss those issues a little further. And then finally, code administration. So that's just the everyday processing of permits and applications. So first, kind of talked to you already through this, intercode consistency, where zoning is ever mentioned in other codes. These are kind of the top 7. of those codes. So we have to make some adjustments. So if we're referring to zoning districts that no longer exist, we need to update that part of the code. So that would be something that we bring back to you the 7-month period where we have identified those code consistency issues. We're calling it a consistency plan to adjust and amend those city codes so that we can get everything working together. So in residential site design, we've identified several issues. Those are outlined in your staff report fully. But there's one new type of site design tool that we have called Blackface Averaging. And it was intended to make infill lots fit well in those neighborhoods. So we don't just have one setback and that's it. We have a build to range. And then if you're doing an infill, we do a Blackface average, but it doesn't take the whole block. It only takes 2 lots on either side of that lot. It says whatever the average is, that's where you can build to. But some of our older neighborhoods, we're finding that for simple additions on the front of a house to avoid building over a sewer line or a water line that's in the back, we're having them, we're having to make some administrative adjustments for those. So we're seeing if we can refine this tool to make it work better. We'll come back to you and tell you more at 7 months. Also, the ground floor unit width for our mixed residential zone districts was intended to improve kind of the livability and sociability of those multifamily developments. The ground floor unit width only applies to stacked apartments, not the side-by-side that are more like townhouses. They only have their own entrance in the front. This would be, an apartment building has one entrance usually. So, but we found that this unit width is not consistent with our Billings apartment style or just basically any ground floor unit width unless you're building just a studio apartment. They're never this narrow. So we're gonna look more at that kind of universe of apartment styles in Billings and come up with a better number for you. Or if it's even needed. We also have a building width maximum that's either a maximum width or a number of units, you decide. So you could have 2 units or you could have 8. And so that gives a little bit of predictability but flexibility. So we may want to change it to just apply that standard for both side-by-sides and stacked units. We have been asked to look at, is there a possibility of doing a front-load garage in the mixed residential zones? So we could allow what has become a standard in Billings, which is to always have the garage right off the street. Now, there is one example of this that was done on the 800 block of Avenue D that I think because of the architecture and the change in color and design elements from unit to unit, it doesn't present as a solid front of garage openings, but it does have garage openings that go out to the street. So I'm looking at other communities that have a similar requirement to see what they do to possibly allow front-load garages in their mixed residential units, particularly in the side-by-side units, not the stacked buildings, obviously, because most of those don't have attached garages. So we're going to explore some possibilities and come back to you at the 7-month reporting period to see if that will work. Okay, there is another maximum building width issue for the N2 zone, which is the equivalent to our residential 7,000 zone, is probably the most used zone district in our new map. And the code sets both a maximum lot width and a maximum building width, but they're 40 feet apart. So if you design for the maximum width of 120 feet, that means that you're going to have 20-foot side yards on both sides of that building, which doesn't exactly make sense. So we're going to look at whether or not we need that maximum building width, or if we could lose that and not lose what the code was intended to accomplish. And there are some examples of 2-unit structures that are 110 feet wide in the N2 zone districts. They're not common. It's more common to be less than 100, but we do have some in that category. We'll look at that more closely and come back to you with the recommendation. Here's another one that kind of a sleeper, I call it, in the code, because we haven't really run up against it before, and this is the residential yard treatment. And it requires that any yard, front, back, or side, be 60% landscaping. We don't have a landscaping permit required for residential. We will not have a residential landscaping permit required. Typically, when somebody paves an extra parking space adjacent to their driveway that exists, and they're not doing anything in the city's right-of-way, they don't need a permit for that from anybody. So we don't see a way of enforcing this. It's not common in Billings that people have paved their whole yards. So I don't think it's a problem. And this is a solution that is looking for a problem. So I'm not sure if we need to keep this. We'll consult with public utilities and engineering. I think this may have the opposite effect of making people use more water outdoors than they actually need to. So we're gonna look at that. And then our code administration, we have a few things in there. One is our administrative relief procedures allows us to make a 5-foot waiver on any setback. And some of our setbacks are 5 feet. But I don't think we intended to waive that down to 0. So we're going to create some clarifying language for that code so that we're not giving 0 setback administrative relief. Then there's residential buildings in mixed-use zones. The way the code is currently written, we cannot issue a rebuild letter to somebody who has a single-family house in a corridor mixed-use zone. And some of those are on Central, Broadwater, Grand Avenue. I'm not sure if we need to change anything, but I think we need to look at that more closely and see if that is really a big problem, or if there's, just as kind of we did for places that didn't meet the setback or separation requirements, that we give them an opportunity to do a special review or some other procedure to allow that rebuild. Also, as currently written, we require a zone change application for every annexation petition. We don't have a default zoning anymore, but we believe that there are instances where the zone district for the proposed annex property, where it's developed, where it's completely surrounded by similar zoning and development, that it would be possible to not require that zone change application and process the zone change administratively concurrent with the annexation. So for example, I think you had one up on Highway 3.
They'll see it on Monday.
Oh, you'll see it on Monday. That is a developed parcel. It's not vacant. It's surrounded by developed parcels. The obvious zoning for that is the N3 zoning. But because the way the code is written, we made them go through the zone change application procedure. So in those instances where we can develop some criteria to put in the code that would allow that to happen, we'd like to make that an easier process, both for staff and for the applicants. And that is that, and questions?
Very good. Councilor Boyer, Councilor Brewell.
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, one way to determine if our RICO did anything is by complaints.
Oh,
Did you receive any complaints during this time? And if so, was there majority one way or another, good, bad, or indifferent? Or can you just give us a description of some of your complaints? if any?
complaints? Well, I'd rather give you a percentage. So I would tell you that 90% of the time, we have helped people with their development aspirations for their property. Whereas before, we would say, oh no, you can't have a covered patio because we have this amount of lot coverage. We can tell them now, yes, you can put a cover on that patio so you're not roasted alive when you try to sit outside. We've also experienced people who have interpreted the code incorrectly. And then when they come in and they explain what the problem is that they're having, it's like, oh no, that's not what the code reads. That's not correct. This is the way it reads, and these are the flexibility that we have within the code. We have done 5 administrative relief applications. 2 of those were for new buildings, for fast serve food, and 2 of them were for residential building additions in that Blackface Averaging that we're kind of bumping up against. We gave them that 5-foot variance to the requirement. There have been instances where people have chosen a building and then looked for a site without consulting the zoning. And those are the ones that are, have many pain points. We do always have solutions. Most of our code requirements that are numerical, you can ask the Board of Adjustment for a variance if you truly cannot meet the code requirements. So for example, we had a project on Blue Creek Road that was for a new build, but the whole front of the property was in a floodplain. So they literally could not bring that building to the street. So they applied for a variance. The variance was granted, and the building has a permit coming forward. So we try to make the code as flexible as possible, but there's always going to be an instance where a planned project runs up against the code, whether it's an old code or this new code.
Thank you very much. Councilor Bebold, Councilor Briakwich.
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, we've had a couple annexations this year that when they came in, they had the amount of signatures needed to require a quorum or a certain percentage of the council to vote on it. And the issue was the N2 zoning. So I understand N2 zoning, the builders want to put as many duplexes on as they can because there's better profit for them, which the profit margins are pretty thin now, especially with the cost of materials and that. But then you also have to feel for the neighbors that have lived there for 20, 30 years, 15 years, and it's N3 zoning or single family. And so if we give an N2 zoning and the builder or the developer goes, oh, I'll put single family houses there. But once they get their zoning, they can do anything they want. So would it be that hard to make an N2/1 subzone for the N2? And that area would only be able to put a single family residence, and it would be kind of like the Atkins property where they got the NX1 on part of the property and N2 on the other part. But that would give the neighbors that are existing some security that they're not going to have a bunch of duplexes right across from their residence.
Well, the N3 zoning may be the appropriate zoning instead of trying to say the N2 is not an N2 in this place. So the N3 and the N2 and all the N districts are based on how much street frontage you have. So the N2, you could do a 1-family or a 2-family structure for every 50 feet of street frontage you have. In the N3, you can only do a 1-family structure, and you have to have 65 feet of street frontage. You can never attach that unit to the existing unit. I just think that there are going to be instances where the obvious choice is just N3. And because there's no minimum lot area, they can design to that street frontage requirement, and possibly realize almost as many dwelling units as a previous N2 choice for the same property under the old code. So we haven't seen any of those zoning requests come forward to go from an N3 to an N2. And I think a lot of, the N2 is not an automatic 2-unit development. The N2 is also intended for just 1-family lots that have that ranch-style development. It's not a full 2 stories. It's not the taller buildings in both the N1 or in the N3. So that's really what it's about.
The 2 annexations that we did, though, both involved N2 construction with the developer planning on putting duplexes in. And the one failed and the other one went through, but it was talked about N3 going into the one up in the Heights. So why couldn't they divide that like the Atkins property and either do the N2/1 or N3 on this side of the street and then the rest of the development N2? Is that possible?
Yes, I mean, they're at the applicant's request, as we get more used to these new zone districts, I think that there will be choices that are more obvious. So for example, you'll see another annexation zone change on Monday night that you saw previously as a request for an N2 that came back as an N3. And that, you know, the application was withdrawn. It was a valid protest. But they realized the benefits of the new code and that the N3 would help them achieve their goals without having to build a 2-unit building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Yakowicz.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Nicole, I hope this is pertinent relating to recode. And so a restaurant downtown approached me. I went and talked with them as well. And there's a real quandary among this restaurant that one person comes in, tells them what to do, they do it, then someone else comes in and tells them they can't do it or they shouldn't have done it from the city. So I'm just wondering is, on one hand, is this relevant? You know, this person said it happened to a lot of their friends who own businesses that they, an inspector or somebody comes in and tells them they need a wall, and then they do the wall, and then they come back and saying, well, you didn't need the wall, why'd you do the wall? I'm just wondering, one, have you heard that before? And two, is it because there's confusion in recode? Is there confusion in, and I did send a memo to you and Mr. Friday about that restaurant downtown.
Was that today?
No, this was a couple weeks ago. But
Okay.
So Mr. Friday
there.
wants to address it too, but
Yeah,
it
it
just.
sounds like a building code issue, not a zoning code issue.
Okay.
But anyway, do you have any information?
It's not relevant until.
Okay.
Councilmember Yakowicz, Mayor and Council.
That's what, Mr. Friday, it may not be relevant to the discussion.
Yeah, it was a building code issue. So yeah, it's a separate issue and we had discussions with the building official, Jessica Iverson, about that as well. But yeah, it's not related to the zoning code.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, I'm not going to let you off the hook like
Okay.
Mike did. He has a good question. He'd like to hear the complaints. And one of the questions my concerns about the recode was some of the right sizing of properties and zoning and stuff like that. So I would like to hear some of the complaints and, you know, maybe justified or not, just to hear, because you're the eyes and ears of what's going on with this new recode. If you can kind of give us some, I appreciate the wins that you gave us, that's good to hear, but I would like to hear some of the failures or complaints from some of the people that you hear the most of.
Well, I would say that we're still in the beginning part of implementing this, particularly on commercial projects. A lot of the commercial projects that we're seeing right now were already in the pipeline when this was adopted. There are a few projects, very few projects that have been through the whole, we applied the entire code to their project from the beginning. It is a learning process, particularly for those that are auto-oriented businesses. So fast food restaurants, drive-through banks, where our code for mixed use in particular, not the heavy commercial necessarily, but the mixed use, directs the designer to pull that building too close to the street. And you can't put all of the auto-oriented stuff in front of a building like you used to under the old code. Because that code says, no, your building has to be 20 feet maximum from the street. Yes, we can give you a little more. We can give you 5 feet more if you need it. But you're not going to have all the parking out front. You can have the parking on the side or in the back. So when you're doing a circulation plan for a auto serve business, it takes a little more time and effort. And, the effort that we have put forth, a lot of effort to a particular business that decided not to use that site because it wasn't fitting the building that they wanted or the site circulation that they wanted. They're looking at another site directly north of that site. And another auto-centered business is looking at the site that they abandoned. So I think it's just going to be a process of learning and keep offering those solutions to the designers and the developers as they come in.
Mayor, quick follow-up on that. Thank you, Nicole. That's helpful. And so when you see these kind of issues, and it sounds to me like it's maybe a reoccurring issue like that, and we're sticking to the code, and businesses some of them are able to work it out, but does this ever become, do you think this could be a problem? Maybe we need to make a exception or make a special code for these auto-type businesses, and using this as an example, because you brought that up. Is that something you think that we need to kind of cater to them, because they have different needs than other commercial-type businesses? They're getting cars coming and going, and so they maybe need something differently designed. Is that something you would have to maybe consider to help these businesses flourish?
We will keep monitoring every single one of those types of projects that comes forward. We have the fast food service, we have the drive-through banking, and a lot of auto-oriented services in retail in Billings. And so we'll track those and report back to you at the 7 months period and say, here's what we found. We had 10 applications. One of them didn't make it all the way through. 9 of them did in compliance.
Thank
Something
you.
like
And
that.
I think with the way COVID is, when there are a lot more businesses are really using the auto, the drive up, buy and pick up kind of stuff. So I hope we take that into account. As I've heard more of people saying this is becoming an endemic instead of a pandemic. So we probably will see this as more of a permanent thing in our society than just it's going to be passed and go back to normal. So Mayor, if you don't mind, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
I think I asked you this and you answered my question in email, but I got to thinking about this with this recode. Are you seeing developers starting to maybe replot their lands now to the width and maybe gaining 1 or 2 lots more out of their land at all to have additional developing sites?
I'm going to turn to Monica, who does a lot of that plan review, but I haven't heard that that's a common occurrence yet.
Okay.
Councilmember Nice, I would say that we're not seeing a lot of replatting of existing subdivisions. The growth that we're seeing in subdivisions is strictly new. And of course, they're designing to recode, so.
Okay.
It's not a common thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole, if I can just ask you, I want to speak for the trees along with the Lorax. Getting rid of the landscaping requirements potentially. If you've seen my water bill, you know I like lots of trees and shrubs. But can you address how that would that have any impact on our street tree requirement? You're shaking your head, no. Okay, so.
No, that would remain in place. It's just this yard treatment part of the code.
So at least the boulevard trees would remain.
Right. If you have a boulevard sidewalk, if you don't, you're allowed to put them behind the sidewalk.
Yeah,
You know?
okay. Just if you can comment on, I don't know, this is probably not a strict recode issue, but the Family Services building, the rebuilt, lovely new building, very functional, much needed. But I was driving by there on First Avenue South, I guess, the other day, and there's not a blade of grass. No trees, no shrubs, not even a errant weed yet. I thought we got away from that. I'm surprised they were able to do that.
Well, I'd have to look into that, but it might have been a permit that was issued before recode came into.
Oh, it was definitely before recode.
Right, so we can't enforce recode code requirements on prior
But we didn't
permits.
have when you went through a major redevelopment like that, we didn't have a commercial landscape improvement?
Central Business District didn't have any
Oh,
landscaping.
because it was Central Business District, okay, gotcha.
So-
Councilmember Purinton and Joy?
Thank you. And Nicole, I did want to publicly compliment your department planning, because I've heard that you guys have really tried very hard to work with people in all their different choices and their concerns, so I do appreciate that. And so going back to that 10%, one of the issues that I know that we brought it up just very briefly was the commercial and industrial zones. We did not really speak to those that much, I think, during our recode discussions. And so can you comment to that? Because that really impacts, I think, our economic development within Billings. And so can you address any issues that you've had within the commercial or industrial zones? And I know that you just mentioned a couple with the drive-through. So is there anything else that you would bring that comes to mind?
Not really. I mean, it's really so far. And as I say, we've really only had a very few handful of projects that are commercial or industrial that have started at least concept discussions with this, and are going to have to meet all of the requirements of the new code. I think that we'll see more activity before the end of the year, and have more to report to you at the 7-month reporting period. But as far as, slowing down economic activity, I have not seen that. We've had developers and prospectors for land, for uses coming from all directions, both coasts, Midwest, Florida, Texas, Minneapolis. So, I mean, nobody is not asking the questions because we have a new code. And we're giving them pretty darn good answers most of the time.
So follow up, Mr. Mayor. So it just came to mind, actually, as you were thinking about that, is that there was one constituent, I guess there's like 6 salvage yards in Billings, and I don't know salvage yards.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not sure if they are zoned typically light industrial. And they came back and theirs was heavy industrial. And they're going, why? Because it's more expensive, I guess, to them. So I just said, you need to go to your department and visit about that. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I spoke with that person.
I don't know
but-
that you did.
No. So in our map update, we tried to keep heavy industrial in heavy industrial and controlled industrial in the light industrial zone districts, wherever it made sense for that district.
Correct.
We didn't upzone people to heavy industrial. That might have just been a map error. So if you hear from them again, tell them to call me, and I can look at that specifically.
And that was, that was the point, because they're just along Main Street up in the Heights, and I'm going, I can't imagine that would be heavy industrial, so I'll get
No.
back with them.
Absolutely not.
So.
Heavy
another
commercial
follow-up.
maybe, but not heavy industrial. I don't
Okay.
think there's any heavy industrial up there.
So I did get a letter from one of the builders, and his concern was with townhomes, is that he is getting more requests for a three-car garage with townhomes. And he said that I guess that width, the building width, does not match up with that. Are there instances where they can make adjustments for that, especially when you get people that's what they want?
Right. Is that in the zone where it's 50% of the facade?
I think so.
Yeah. And I think that's, that builder is building in Daybreak subdivision right now, I think. He has asked us if he could do a subdivision variance, just to apply it to the lots he owns in that subdivision to allow a 60% facade garage openings, because he's selling these, the oversized for the RV, and then the 2-car, and then the 1-car on the side of that. So it ends up being a lot of garage opening on the front facade. So we told him, yes, bring us the variance, tell us your lots, we'll run it through. So.
Thank you.
We haven't seen a lot of that, but there's some of that.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Have you had anyone other than the Home Builders Association make those presumably are the people we are regulating with this code? Have you had any other groups that spoke up in terms of issues that have been brought forward?
I have not heard from groups. We always try to work, absolutely, as you say, with every property developer, their concept, their ideas. They have a use, they don't know where to go, which zones should I choose? So we kind of point them in the right direction as far as that's concerned. But no, not the commercial real estate folks, none of those have come to us and said, there's a real problem here. No, have not heard that.
Thank you. Mayor, could I just make a little comment then? I looked on the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration website, and I looked at pedestrian safety. And it recommends that we teach our children when they're walking down the street to stop, look right, left, and left again, or maybe I have it wrong, left, right, and left again, before they cross a driveway, because of the issue of safety. So I know that you're going to be looking into the area of front-loaded garages and everything, and I would just like to speak up for pedestrians. This is a really important issue. We put an additional $25,000 into our Safe Routes to School. That's the sidewalk the children will be walking on. So I would just like to have you keep that in mind as you're looking towards this. There's a lot of really important information about safety in terms of, well, there's the three E's: engineering, enforcement, and education. But there's a really important part that planning plays in that. And I would just like that, since no group has spoke up as you've looked towards that, I would just like to remind you to remember that pedestrians are the people who use the sidewalks, and to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Councilmember Neese and Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilwoman Purinton brought up about the changing of different codes if there was a mistake on the map. Are you going to be bringing those changes to us at some point in time that you've made since we initially adopted the zoning map? Will you be bringing some of those changes to us to let us know what you have changed?
I can compile a list for you. In fact, there was one today where somebody got a little excessive with the red pen and coded somebody's single-family residence as corridor mixed-use too. I have no idea why. It just happened to share a boundary with the corridor mixed-use 2 property, but it was completely inappropriate zoned. So yes, I can provide you a list of those that we've updated since you adopted the map, because they were errors, obvious errors.
Okay, Mayor, quick follow-up on that then. Was there quite a few properties, offhand, do you know what the number of changes were? Just, if you don't have it, that's okay.
I don't know. I'd have to put them all together to figure it out.
Councilor Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I thought for sure we'd have some complaints about signage, since we spent so many years on signage. Did you have any issues with the sign people?
No, I mean, they've adjusted to the new code. So they're bringing signs in that are compliant with the new code. There have been a lot of phase changes, from when a business changes from one type of business to another. They just leave the sign in place and replace the faces of the sign. And we're allowing them to do that so long as they don't touch anything else. As soon as they start taking cabinets off or anything like that, then they have to bring the sign into compliance. So hopefully we'll get that Harbor Freight sign off the middle of Grand Avenue someday.
Okay, any other questions before we go to public comment on item number 3, Council? Councilor Pearson.
Just a quick comment on the 20-foot setback in commercial area or for businesses. Grand Avenue from 17th West, that was supposed to be widened, and it was not because it was my understanding because the properties or the businesses are too close. There's no right-of-way there. And so it's difficult to expand that road. So do you see that as an issue going forward in any sort of road expansion for the future, that when you have the businesses set that close to the road?
Some of those buildings, I think the city identified 3 or 4 buildings they would have had to have purchased, which made that an astronomical cost for that lane widening, which was really intended to make sure that the center turn lane was wide enough on there. So the 20-foot is a maximum. We also still have the arterial setback, and that's a setback from the center line of the street. Typically, an arterial street is 100 to 110 feet wide. Grand, on the other hand, is only 60 feet wide in some areas. So even though we have that 20-foot maximum, if the arterial is further than that, they have to meet the arterial setback. So we've preserved that possibility of arterial street improvements for the future.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to, we'll go to public comment as soon as the former planning director.
It's my last comment. Last comments. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to be really briefly just reinforce a couple things. First of all, I appreciate what Councilmember Purinton had heard with staff working with everyone. I just wanted to echo that with Nicole and the other planners and Monica, all the work that's been going on since the code was put in place. With all sorts of different developers and people in their homes. Like she said, everything from, little sun porches up to major commercial developments. And it's really, the HBA sent us that letter with 4 items. And really, beyond that, there's been very little that we've heard and no serious crises or anything. We've worked through a lot of different projects. As Nicole said, we're still really early, so it's going to even be a while. We can't even point to a project on the commercial side, especially, that's on the ground that's actually gone from the very beginning through yet. I mean, they're in that process right now. But anyway, I think it's been really positive. I have not gotten calls, to me saying, "Oh my gosh, this is a disaster. We need to do this or that." The staff has been working through things really well, and people are learning the code as we go along. And you're going to see some projects, our first planned neighborhood development projects next week at your meeting here with the annexation. So some of those big pieces that are really critical are coming forward. So I just wanted to mention that. And as she said, we'll be coming back with more information and some recommendations here in the next, at the next 7-month period. So thanks.
Great, thank you. We'll open up for public comment then on item number 3, the zoning code update that you just heard. If you'd like to comment, please feel free, come to the podium. Just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address. Would anybody like to comment on item number 3, the project recode update? Anybody like to comment? Don't see anybody, so we'll close the public comment period on item number 3 and move on to item number 4, Stillwater Building update. Jessica Iverson, our facilities manager, is on her way up. Kevin, is any introductory comments before we give it over to Jessica?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, tonight what you're going to be getting is a summary of the inspection reports that we've been working on since about July 12th, or that's when we started to schedule those. At that point, Jessica and her staff, mainly consisting of John, have been working very diligently on this due diligence phase to complete these. At the end of it, you will see a staff recommendation based on these 11 inspection reports. And what we'd like to see is council give us some direction to staff on where we would need to head from this point based on these inspection reports. And we do have a lot of time-sensitive things coming up here with deadlines coming up rather quickly. So we do need to act and move accordingly. So once Jessica's ready with her PowerPoint, I'll turn it over to her to kind of go through some of that.
Okay, thank you. And I do see that the owner, Joan Holden, is in the audience. So just to the extent that we have questions for Joe, I guess we could go there or not, but I did want to comment that he is in the audience. So, Jessica.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So as Mr. Iflin said, we've been working diligently since the buy-sell was signed on July 13th on our inspections. So we had several inspectors over at the Stillwater Building. We went through the MEP, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, civil, which is the site, the envelope and glazing, spray applied fireproofing material. We did asbestos and radon testing. We looked at the roof, structural, and the elevators. So overall, the condition for the age of the building is in good condition on most of these points. So I'll go through these quickly. I won't go over every single one, but the site was good. The envelope, we have the precast panels on the exterior, on the upper floors, granite panels on the first level. They looked at the windows and storefront. Most everything was good. The biggest thing on the envelope was the sealants. A lot of the sealants between the windows and the panels, and then between the panels themselves, were in poor condition, and they do recommend replacement. Structural overall was good. They said the building was well maintained. It's a solid building. There were some recommended repairs in a few limited areas. There was some corrosion and some spalling of some of the concrete. Elevators are in good condition. However, they are 26 years old and the controls are obsolete. Parts could be difficult to locate. So the inspector who looked at the elevators did recommend modernization, but the life expectancy is unknown. Going on to the mechanical systems, they looked at the boilers, the chillers, cooling towers, air handlers, duct system. Everything is fairly dated. So even though it's been pretty well maintained, there is concern obviously on the rest of life for these items. But looking at their current condition, are they usable? For the most part, yes. The biggest ones were that we have listed as poor here are the cooling towers. The recommendation from the engineer was that they have reached the end of their service life and would recommend replacement, and then air handlers. So on every floor, there's air handlers in a central fan room, and then there are also the high velocity air mixing boxes along the exterior under the windows. And all of those are fairly old, inefficient units.
Councilor Biakuch.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. Just I wanted to understand what is there excellent, good, fair, Could you just give me a parameters of that?
Sure. So we had 3 categories: good, fair, and poor. So when we're going through these, for the condition that the unit's in now, they're saying, you know, based on its age, it's in good condition.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, thank you. And then, so we talked about the air handlers. Those would be recommended to replace. Additionally, that's one of those items that, while we're under construction, if we are building out these floors, we would want to do it at that time because it would be a lot more costly to go in and do it later. And then the duct system, fair condition. I'll talk about this later, but it was one area where we discovered more asbestos-containing materials, whereas in the duct sealant on the duct system. Looking at the electrical system, the distribution is good. However, it is original vintage, and the engineer did recommend it to be replaced. Looking at the disconnects, switches, and transformers on each floor, they said those were in poor condition and would recommend replacement. I guess lighting, they did have a acceptable, which maybe we'll call that fair, but it is incomplete throughout. There were some code deficiencies in the finished areas. There were some stairwell lights that weren't operational and weren't providing proper lighting for egress. The fire alarm system is newer, and that system can be expanded to meet code requirements for new build out in the building. And then the backup generator that is there is in poor condition and would need to be replaced. For plumbing systems, the water piping was in good condition. They did recommend replacing the hot water heat exchanger with a gas-fired water heater. Right now, the domestic hot water is supplied through a heat exchanger from the boilers. And then the drain, waste, and vent is in good condition. However, there are some areas where there's PVC piping in return air plenum, which is a code violation. So they recommended the cast iron piping in lieu of the PVC. And then additionally, the roof drains do not have overflow drains. And that is a code requirement as well, to have an overflow drain if your primary drain is not draining. On the spray applied fire resistant material, the overall condition was good. However, there are multiple locations where there's issues of adhesion and thickness application. And so the recommendation would be to have the building owner repair those issues. Radon was good. There were nothing of concern there. Asbestos, they did find additional asbestos containing construction materials present throughout the building. I'll talk about that a little more later. So when we look at the total repair costs, and again, this is based on the recommendations from the reports that we had done, our grand total is just over $7 million. And that's the numbers that were supplied to us by the inspectors. So when we look at minimum viable for us in facilities, we're looking at, for us to move into this building, what would we want to see done as part of the remodel project? Things that we think are vital to invest into this building so that if we're going to build it out and be in that building for years to come, it's going to be sort of this prudent choice to make at this time to say these are the issues that we need to address currently. So we did pull out from those numbers, we pulled out the boilers, basement exhaust. Those are things that we know will need to be replaced in the next 5 to 10 years, but for now, we could leave them in place and it wouldn't be, it wouldn't add a lot to the cost to switch it out later, where some of the other things, such as the electrical distribution system, if we're not doing that at the time of construction, when we're building out the building, it's gonna add a lot more cost later. So those are the numbers that we're trying to capture when we're saying minimum viable. What are the things that we need to make sure that we're investing in the building now or as we build it out? And that's just over 3.5 million. So when we look at the asbestos costs, we were given this number of 1.35 million roughly. And that number is based on removing all of the asbestos in the building. So as we talked last time, there's some areas where asbestos is encapsulated, It's in areas that we would never anticipate touching it, disturbing it as part of construction, and so it would largely be left in place. The issue, though, with having asbestos in a building is that when you do go to do remodel work or any repair work in areas where you know there's asbestos, then you're going to have to take special measures to abate it. And that's going to add to the cost of the construction above and beyond what the project is that you're doing. So there are certain areas in the building, such as the electrical and data rooms, that do have asbestos in those areas now, that if we were moving them during the construction process, we'd have to abate the asbestos. So that's our biggest concern, is renovations that disturb areas where there are ACMs. And then the replacement of the ductwork. So the spiral ductwork that serves all of the high-velocity air mixing boxes along the perimeter of each floor, those have asbestos in the duct sealant, in the mastic. So this is just an example from the asbestos report showing the areas where we know there's, or where they discovered asbestos on each floor. So the blue lines that you see, that's the ductwork that's going from the fan room out to the perimeter of the building. Then, if you can see the green, there's some asbestos containing mastic that is present at the stairwells and around that central core mechanical room area. And then there's a light blue color. You can see the three, sort of those three sections, and those are the IT or data and electrical rooms that I mentioned, that if we were to move those locations where those rooms are, we'd be demoing those walls that do have asbestos material in them. So looking at the cost per square foot, this is a refresher from last time. We were at the $17 million price for the building purchase. And then the build out that the city would need in the next 3 years is the 100,000 square feet. We had roughly estimated $100 a square foot for build out, which put us at 12.6 million for just the design and build out. It took us to 29.6 million for the whole project cost. So when we look at
I apologize, Jeffrey, could you just go back to that last slide? I just want to.
Sure.
Okay, and so the you added the 17 and the 12 to get to 29.6.
Correct. And there is about 35,000 square feet of the building that's currently finished. And that's lobbies, common areas, and then the county offices on the third floor.
So we would have 135,000 total finished.
Right, so we have that on this slide. So this is looking at the $7 million in recommended repairs and upgrades based on the inspection reports that we had done. So not that the 7 million would happen all at once, but it's numbers that we want to be, recognizing as part of this project cost in the near term. So we added that into the 29.6 million, and that got us to the 36.6. So if we look at the gross square footage of the 213,000 and change for the building, it gave us a per square foot cost at $171 a square foot. And that's if we value every square foot of that building equally. And that's assuming, of course, after we build out the 100,000 square feet for the city offices. So we'd be at 135,000 square feet of finished area. And then we'd have a little more than 78,000 square feet that's either unfinished, basement area, mechanical areas. Then looking at new construction, using $350 a square foot, and the city space needs for the next 20 years is about 120,000 square feet. Estimating a number for land, and that would give us about $363 a square foot cost for a comparable new construction downtown. And then, did we want to go over this now? I guess this is a question. Would we like to go over the sources and uses on the funding side? Or would we like to talk more about the inspections before we move on?
Why don't you go ahead and let's get this behind us and then we'll come back.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'll let Andy say a few things then. Just the two.
Okay. So, good evening, Mayor and City Council. This is a recap from a few weeks ago when the buy-sell was presented to you, potential sources and uses when the estimated, before we had the inspection reports and the estimated cost of around $29.6 million. This was in that staff memo again, but I just thought it'd be important to bring it up again here, what our planned approach was for coming up with $29.6 million. There are excess general fund reserves where the majority of this would come from, $20,350,000. Based upon the square footage build out, well, then what we did is we looked at the build out needs. There's public safety, there's what I'm calling non-general fund and public safety departments. Let's be planning, building, public works, et cetera. And then there are the general fund, non-public safety, which are going to be admin, HR, finance. I think those are the three that come to mind. So the departments that are non-general fund make up about 30% of the square footage. So they would pay their build-out costs through their departmental sources, whether that's charge for services or other sources, about $3.4 million. And we would recommend using $5.8 million of the ARPA funds for the public safety portion build out. That would total your $29.6 million. And I think there was a question, I wanted to provide kind of a visual of what that looks like. So on the left here, I guess you're all looking at different screens. So I can't use the laser pointer very well, but we'll go left to right. So on the left, that's the general fund reserves, how we ended fiscal year 21, $33.7 million. Again, largely related to the CARES Act money that came in, which reduced our need on the general fund for public safety funds. So we have a recommended, we'll start at the bottom there, we have a recommended minimum reserve of right around $12 million. So that's that first portion. We would use $17 million of the general fund reserve to purchase the building. Then we would use $3.35 million of the excess reserves for the general fund non-public safety build out. That's your $20,350,000. I'm going to go back one slide. That's the $20,350,000 at the top there. You would end with about $1 million over your excess reserves if this all was to the penny. On the right-hand side, separate and distinct from the general fund, in its own fund, are our ARPA dollars. We have received 1/2 of that, $15.9 million. We have it in the bank, so it's $7 million and some change. We would recommend using 5.8 of that for public safety build out. That would leave $10 million in ARPA for other eligible ARPA projects. Again, this was all based upon when we did the buy-sell at $17 million and projected build-out costs. This does not include any of these additional costs. If the city were to incur those costs, these are your funds available. It's at this point in time, largely is ARPA, and then about $1 million of that excess from general fund. This would have you ending eventually at your minimum reserve in general fund. Just to be clear, you would be spending almost the entirety of your excess reserves on this. There's your timeline. All right.
All right, so moving on regarding the purchase agreement timeline, we signed the agreement on July 13th. Well, the mayor did. And the current end of the due diligence period is September 10th. We do have an amendment to the agreement that is on the August 23rd council agenda to extend the due diligence period to September 30th, which would give us a little more time to go over all our inspection findings or further negotiations if that's the direction council wants to go. And on the September 13th meeting, we're currently on the agenda, which would be council action to either execute the due diligence contingency to terminate the agreement or to remove the contingencies and move forward with the purchase. With the extension, however, we actually do get another meeting, so council could also act at the September 27th meeting prior to the end of the due diligence period of September 30th. So as Mr. Iflin said at the beginning, we have a couple recommendations that we'd like to present and then discuss with council. So the recommendation from our legal counsel, if we want to negotiate, would be to actually terminate the agreement during the due diligence period and then negotiate a new agreement based on the inspection findings. The other option would be to terminate the agreement during the due diligence period and pursue different options to meet facility needs. And this is where staff is requesting council recommendations or council guidance on those options. And I would like to make a comment further regarding the building owner who is here, and I'm sure will provide public comment. To conclude the inspections, we are trying to be as diligent as possible. We know this is an old building. We know these systems are old. There's no question, like we knew that going in. There's no question about it. And they have been well maintained. However, if we're gonna be prudent in acquiring this facility, we need to think about the investments that we would be making now and making within the next 5, 10, 15 years in this building. So from a facility standpoint, when I'm recommending that we make that these investments or these dollar amounts for these improvements, it's from that standpoint, not saying these are all gonna fail tomorrow, but saying if we're gonna set ourselves up for success in this building and what we should be investing in for the city facility, that would be our recommendation from that. So with that, I would take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, are there some questions for Jennifer, Councilmember Purington, or Andy?
Jessica.
Or anybody else?
Jessica.
Jessica, what did I say?
Jennifer,
I'm sorry.
Well, I've got two things.
The
The J was, yeah. So I've got two questions, actually. So just on the slide on the contingency at 12.5%, what does that refer to?
That would be a contingency when we're estimating the numbers that we think it's going to be. The contingency is the variables that we're not anticipating. We haven't put it out to bid. We don't know what these actual costs are gonna be. So we put a contingency factor in there to account for that.
And Jessica, would you mind going back to that slide just so we are all clear on what's being referred to there?
I think it was.
Did I go too far?
Yeah, because it was under Andy's. Should be right there.
Oh.
1.4.
Correct.
So the other question.
Go ahead.
You came up with $7 million. I think in our meeting the other day, I came up with 5, but I may have dropped a couple of figures somewhere along the line. But I think at that time you were looking at 6.2 million. And so now we're up to 7. Do you know what the difference was between last week and now?
Correct. So the 6.3 roughly that we had talked about did not include the roof replacement. And if you read in the report, the roof replacement is about 7 years out. So we were trying to just capture everything from all the reports. I didn't include that just because it's not an immediate. They're recommending the roof be replaced within 7 years.
Okay, so follow up, Mr. Mayor. So the other thing that I think that we had asked was if you could do that, what do we need to do immediately? If we bought the building tomorrow, what do we need to do immediately? And what those costs would look like? And then to do, planning out that nothing's going to fail before we get to it, the 3-year, the 5-year, the 10-year. It's my understanding that the elevator here in this building is 25 years old and it works great. So, it doesn't mean that we're going to have to replace that elevator. So I know that there were some of the things that we asked for, some sort of a timeline as to what we were doing. And also I had asked about a maintenance cost, a yearly maintenance cost on the building, because I think that's imperative. And I would assume even going forward, we buy that building, you would have to have maybe 1 or 2 janitors taking care of it, a cleaning service. So that would be an additional, I would suppose, maintenance cost. So do you have any of those figures for us either?
So, Councilmember Parrington, going back to your first comment, this was the number that we came up with, the 3.54, which would be the immediate things based on the inspection reports. Okay. That is our minimum viable repair. If we're going to go in and remodel that building as city offices, these are the items that we would want done at that time. That we would say would need to be done at that time, is the 3.54. Regarding the operation and maintenance costs, we have some data from the current owner. We don't have enough data for me to confidently give you a number at this time.
Okay.
Councilmember Denise.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer,
Jessica.
Now you've got it.
It's spreading.
Jessica. Yeah, where's your name tag? This number does not include the asbestos abatement, correct?
Correct. So the asbestos, so it does include the ductwork replacement, the $450,000. It doesn't include sort of the premium costs that we'd be looking at for, say, moving those electrical rooms that we know the walls have asbestos in those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. Jessica, could you go back to the slide that shows a new building, a new facility, and this one? So I guess maybe I'm not grasping it very well, but when we say, so the new construction is for 120,000 square feet. This building is 135,000. No, how much is this building completely? Stillwater, I'm sorry. That's where I'm confused.
That's at the gross square footage is that number at the bottom, the 213,000.
Okay, and the new construction price is built out for how many years facility needs?
Councilmember Joy, that is based on the master plan for 2045, I believe.
2045, and when was that plan done?
In 2019.
2019, thank you.
So they were looking out about 25 years.
Thank you.
Other questions for Jessica or Andy? Councilmember Shaw.
Thanks. This is a quick one. So of the 2 options, both recommendations are to terminate this agreement. So my question is, do you need us to extend out the development agreement, or do you just need us to pick one of those 2 options?
So Councilmember Shaw, I don't know if we should defer to legal.
Yeah, so, and then I'll take a little stab at it here, Councilmember Shaw. So our legal counsel on this, Doug James, just recommended that that's probably the easiest and the cleanest, because there are a lot of things that we would have to deal with via the inspection reports and the minimum viable, things like that. So he thinks that would be, the most expedient, most, viable route to go, is just terminate the agreement and move on to a new agreement. Certainly we're looking from, direction. If you'd rather just us try to do an amendment to the agreement, we could do that. Again, right now, under the current agreement that we're in, we've got contract deadlines that we've got to meet. feet. So, if we need more time, we still would like that extension. If council wants to see more information at a work session or something, then we can come back and provide that. So that's why we're looking for direction tonight on which way to head.
Jessica, I've got a couple of questions. On the square footage, my understanding is that we currently need around 100,000, but the 120,000 square feet allows for about 20 years of projected growth. Is that correct?
Yes, Mayor Cole.
Okay, so looking then at the new construction option, can you explain why in this example we used the $350 a square foot? Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but previously we were told of a range of 300 to 350. If we use the 300, that's 1/7 less. A little quick math, if you multiply 43.5 million times 6/7, to get down to the $300 a square foot, you come to 37.3 million, at which point you're within $600,000 of the Stillwater option, but you're getting a brand new building without any of those future repair costs. So why the 350 over the 300?
So Mayor Cole, the 350 is based on current construction costs, the best data that we have to work with. So if we're looking at building a new building in Billings, that's what we have been told it would cost approximately.
Okay. Do you think the 350 is more accurate than the 300?
Correct. If we could build a building for 300, then a square foot, you are correct. We would be getting close to the 37 million total project cost.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Brown?
So are you talking the 350 today or in 2 years from now?
Yeah, Councilmember Brown, that would be in today's dollars.
Okay, because right now, everything's higher than heck.
Correct.
I mean, we certainly hope that it doesn't stay up there forever. So 300 may be more realistic outside of pandemic, right?
Potentially.
Okay. It's all speculation.
It's hard, yeah, right. It's hard to speculate.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Councilmember Brown, I mean, just a little bit of follow-up to what Ms. Iverson is saying is, and then I've talked with other developers downtown and stuff, and not about the Stillwater building, anything like that, but they were giving us, the range of 325 to 350. I mean, material, just availability of materials is an issue right now, let alone the cost of materials. So, yeah, we would hope it will go down, but, who knows at this point. But I think 350 is a good conservative. I mean, there's not a contingency factor in there. It's a good ballpark figure for us to try to compare, what we'd be getting with the Stillwater building versus what it might cost for new construction, our best estimate at this point.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm sorry, Councilmember Brown, go ahead and follow up
So
with
the
that, Councilmember
follow-up
Purington.
then would be the build out of the Stillwater building then, are those based on today's cost as well, or 2 years ago, or whenever this all started?
Yeah, Councilmember Brown and Jessica, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but they're based on the most recent figures we could obtain for what a build out would cost. And I think when we originally reported, we were in the $60 to $70 a square foot range, a year or two back, and now I think we're up at that $100 a square foot range, somewhere in that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Purington?
Just one other thing that I think is worth noting on this too, is that you're looking at 120,000 square feet with a 25-year projection, whereas the Stillwater building, you would be looking at plenty, over what we say, 100 years?
Councilmember Purington, I will not be around when we would talk about
Well, I won't either.
So we'll hold it to you.
So you can say anything you want to. So I'm just going to jump in here, I guess, because I know that you're looking for direction. And I think. Do you want to wait?
No, this is general discussion. We'll have public comment, but go ahead.
So, and I think Councilmember Joy made the comment at the meeting, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. And I agree with that. We know, as you stated initially, this is an older building. I don't think there was any expectation from me anyway, that every crack was going to be sealed and everything was going to be perfect. I was a little surprised at, the inspection report, but that's me. So, I mean, I would really like to continue to pursue the Stillwater building at this point. If we feel like we need to go back and renegotiate, I'm fine with that. I think that's a good plan to do that. There was some talk, well, if the $6 million and take that off of the $7 million, we'll buy it for 11. I don't think that's not what I would ever dream of even suggesting. So I think there might be some place in the middle that we need to come up with, and I hope that Mr. Holden would be willing to take a look at what we can do, because I think it's a great fit for the city.
Okay, thank you. Further questions, discussion, Councilor Rebo?
Thank you, Mayor. We're just going back and forth about that $300 and $350 a square foot. That's about as speculative as how soon those boilers are going to go out. And a whole bunch of the other stuff on the inspection report, it could last another 50 years. We don't know. Nobody wrote a guarantee that it's going to go out in 5 years, did they? I don't think they did. They just says they're getting old. There's some things that's old that's still running. Our city water plant is over 100 years old, and it's still supplying 50, 60 million gallons of water a day to the city. So just because it's old, I'm getting there, and I don't think I'm worthless yet. I might be, but, so I think we got to look at it that way, that, yeah, this is what these people said, but are they going to sign their name and say, yep, I'll guarantee in 5 years it's going out? And the other thing you got to look at is that building's full of redundancy. If one of those boilers goes out, there's another one that's going to keep the building running. You wouldn't have that in a new building, and things go bad in new buildings too. So you got to kind of look at the whole picture. Just because they said that, yeah, it's good, but it's old, it doesn't mean it's going to go out in 5 years.
Thank you very much. Further comments, Councilmember Ronning? Questions?
I've got a lot of comments, but I don't think we're there yet.
However you want to.
Yeah, so I'll ask a question. Jessica, do you happen to know how many other offers is the city in competition with other buyers? Is there a line of buyers that's waiting to purchase that building?
Councilmember Ronning, we are not aware of any.
Okay, thank you.
Any other buyers?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jessica and Kevin, the other issue, of course, is we've only got two options, the Stillwater building and new construction. Kind of the third option is other used cars out there. Do you want to comment on is this because we know there are no other used cars, or what's our ability to find another used building?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor and Council. And I think I touched on a little bit, the last time we did do, when Council asked us to go out there and look at Plan Bs, we did go out there and start investigating other properties. Is there some out there properties? Yes. We didn't dig too deep, but, at that time, when we were recommending the $17 million, price tag, it seemed the Stillwater building still seemed to be the viable option. Since then, we have been approached, we'd certainly, by some, developers, real estate people, are there other options? They're saying yes, but we've not investigated them to any detail. So, that's kind of the status of where we're at. Nothing is certainly popping to the surface and glowing neon lights saying, this is a better deal, this is a better deal out there. But, we can certainly look and dig deeper if that's what the council chooses to do.
Okay, thank you. I saw another hand down here. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Jessica, can you explain some of the, surprises or the kind of the bigger items here? I think when you were when their committee, we were talking about the air handling as far as how things were sealed in the walls. I think the work was done. They actually built out some of the air handling, and then things were sealed in there with the asbestos that wasn't disclosed. So how much of the asbestos was not disclosed, and what type of work that was done on the building now that has to be redone to actually get to that asbestos and remove it?
Thank you, Councilmember Neese. So going back to the asbestos question, last time I was here, we talked about the 2 locations that we were informed of at the time. There was asbestos in the transformer room and the floor between the first and second floor, where the second floor cantilevers over the first floor. There's some encapsulated asbestos in that location. Those were the only 2 locations that the owner disclosed to us initially. So when we had our asbestos investigation done, they discovered several more areas of construction materials that did contain asbestos. So,
Excuse me, how many more areas?
I couldn't even, so it is several areas. I don't have a number, a quantity. All the ductwork, all that spiral ductwork on every floor. There are fire doors that contain asbestos. We're not concerned about that. It's encased within the door itself. But there are some locations, so around all the stairwells, the mechanical rooms on every floor, there's this asbestos mastic that's there. It has been somewhat encapsulated by construction. There is an area in the basement where they have a mechanical room, or it's their maintenance room, and there's asbestos in the joint compound of those walls. So if we were to move those walls or reconstruct that area, we'd be concerned with the asbestos. And there's also asbestos on the underside of some of the floor structure that has been sprayed over. So it's currently encapsulated. However, if we're going to install any penetrations, any new equipment that would need to go through that floor, we would be disturbing the asbestos at that time.
A quick follow-up, Mayor.
Please.
Didn't you mention something about some of this spray was starting to come down or fall down and there's exposing some of the asbestos, or was I mixing that up with some of the fire spray that was not adhering correctly?
So Councilmember Neese, I don't know that we had specific locations where the new fireproofing was exposing old fireproofing. However, we do know that there is some old asbestos fireproofing behind some newer fireproofing. So that is a likely or a possible scenario. And then there's other areas where the new fireproofing did not properly adhere or was removed for equipment replacement or something like that, and then didn't get reapplied to the steel structure as it should have. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Jessica or Andy, was there a item in the cost line for contract administration for this actual build out? This is going to be a big project. Was that incorporated to hire an architect, consultant, project manager? Is that in that list? And if not, what would that cost? If it is there, then it is there. I just know the glazing report specifically called that out, that's an important element of, I think they said between 5 and 20%. I think most architects charge about 10%, but.
Mayor, we had about 2.6 million of the construction was the design cost.
Okay, that's that. And where, that's on top of the 10.
So that's part of the design and build out.
Okay,
so the
gotcha.
10 million for the build out and then the 2.6 for the design.
So the 2.6 is not just design, but design and contract
Construction
administration?
administration, correct.
Okay, thank you. Further questions for Jessica? And again, this number is the 10 for the build out plus contract administration and design, but does not include the whatever 7 million plus asbestos costs.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right, anything else before we go for, open up for public comment? And we can come back for general discussion, council, because staffs like to have some direction here, obviously. Okay, well, let's open it up, and again, Joe is in the audience, and with the council's permission, I'll give him more than 180 seconds, if you'd like to comment. But anybody, including Joe, would like to come forward to comment on item number 4, please feel free to do so.
And Mayor and Council, while we're waiting for any public comment, I just want to, appreciate what Mr. Holden has done. He's been very accommodating during this whole inspection process. It is lengthy. It does require a lot of his time to be in the building, open up things, allow our, staff to be in there and stuff. So I do just want to, send out an appreciation for his accommodation during this process.
Thank you for pointing that out. Anybody like to comment on what you've heard or on this topic? Please come forward.
I'm Joe Holden, 316 North 26th Street. A little bit of a disadvantage here because the engineers didn't share their assumptions or any of their findings with me so that I could maybe give them some input and reduce the cost of this dramatically. For one thing, like the mechanical, the boilers aren't even at half their useful life. I don't know if he didn't realize that they're cast iron water tube boilers, but and they're in excellent condition. In fact, the boiler inspector said he was going to write us a letter that said that there's about as good a boiler as there is in the state of Montana. And they definitely don't need to be replaced. They could last another 20 years. And then there's confusion on the air handlers. The devices around the perimeter of the building are not air handlers. They are mixing boxes. And they're just a simple mechanical device that's operated with a new electrical arm that just opens more cold air or more warm air to mix and come through the registers. That high pressure air handler is in the fan room. There's 2 air handlers in each fan room. One's a high pressure that takes care of the perimeter of the building, and one's low pressure that takes care of the center of the building. And, I just don't agree that those need to be replaced. I don't, ever. In fact, something came up about energy efficiency. I figured out, we spend $55,000 a year on gas, okay? And if you equate that to a 2,000 square foot house, it would be like $86 a month for 6 months in the winter, which is, I think, pretty reasonable. So our system is not inefficient. And so I think that is a colossal waste of money to replace all that stuff. It's all good, high quality equipment. And if you do, when the end of the useful life on those boilers comes, it would be sensible to go from steam boilers to hot water boilers. And it's easy to do because you can go right up through all the fan rooms with the piping. You don't have to go into an occupied space. Just run those pipes up there and put them in the coils, and it wouldn't be that big a job. And I bet you wouldn't need anything like that for 20 years, as long as you continue to maintain the boilers correctly. And the state virtually insists on you keeping the boilers maintained. So I think that $2 million is completely unnecessary. And then on the electrical, I called my electrical contractor, went over each one of these items. And one of the most glaring things that doesn't make sense is replacing the bus bars for, $600 or $600,000? I mean, that's a solid copper bar. It doesn't have any moving parts. It doesn't have a useful life. It has the life of forever. In fact, it was manufactured in the 1960s. And the copper bars, or the copper then was more pure. Today, copper has more additives in it, and it doesn't conduct electricity as good as the old copper. So, you know, why would you take a solid copper bar and take it out, a perfectly good one, and put in a new one? But anyway, then, like the transformers, they all work. And my electrical contractor said, well, why would you replace a transformer? He says, you only replace a transformer if you need to change the size of it or it quits working. You don't just change them. But anyway, oh, and then lighting controls. There was something on the 4th floor. I turned the circuit breakers off for the lights on the 4th floor because it was so bright in there. And they're activated with motion control sensors so that you don't need anything done with those. So I guess all I need to do is turn the circuit breakers on and you can see that the lights will go on and off and they're controlled. But you know that even the generator, I think the generator's got less than 100 hours on it. Why replace it? It works. We changed the oil in it. It functions fine. And it's an old diesel generator, sure. But it's inside of a benign environment. And, you know, what can make it go haywire, really? I mean, just change it just for the sake of changing it? And then this plumbing, the PVC. Okay, the PVC on the 5th floor that collects all the stormwater, he recommended changing it to cast iron for $170,000. Well, we have fire safing that we used on the PVC. In other areas, you just simply wrap it. It's a foil faced and it almost looks like it's insulation. You just wrap the pipe with it and then you're in compliance with the code. You don't need to go to $170,000 worth of cast iron pipe, and cast iron pipe doesn't last as long as PVC. And then asbestos, I'm really at a disadvantage there. There is some places that the insulation or the asbestos fell between the walls in the data rooms and the electrical rooms. And those have got plaster on the outside of them. And I don't know that anybody would ever change your electrical or data rooms. So there's no reason to take the asbestos out. And it's sealed with a foam sealant on the top of the wall. So it's encapsulated. And some of these other areas, I just am not aware of them. It would be nice if I could have sat down with these folks and they could have shown me, we could have walked over and I could say, yeah, okay, I agree with that. But then the asbestos sealant on the duct, the $400,000 deal, we tested that when we did the building the first time, or did the asbestos abatement, and it came back negative. But there was 2 or 3 different color of the sealant, and it's as hard as a nail polish. And so it's not friable. And $450,000, if you wanted to get rid of that, you could just take a saw and cut those chunks out and put a sleeve in and put new sealant in. I mean, you don't need to spend $450,000 on all new ducting. Or you could just leave it. And if you could put an encapsulate over the top of it, because you're never going to change that high pressure ducting. I mean, it's not like you're going to move it around because it is your perimeter ducting. It isn't where some of your other occupied spaces where you might put a bunch of offices. It's your perimeter ducting. Let's see. Oh, and then the caulking on the exterior panels. We took out all the caulking from the inside that we could get, and we recalked it. And we've never had a leak There's no staining inside the building. It's just unnecessary. You don't need to do that. If you had water migrating into the building, I would agree with it. But there is no water migrating through those wall panels or the windows. And then the elevators. I mean, why modernize them if you don't need to yet? And you can get parts. And they're working fine. The Otis people do a great job of maintaining them. They're rarely ever down. I mean, a good, robust elevators, and they're not that old. And so I don't think that's necessary. I mean, maybe in 15 or 20 years, sure. When they're completely outdated. But I mean, you look down the street at the Hart Albin building, they haven't modernized theirs in 104 years. But then the roofing. I've got quotes to re-roof that building that we use for our CAM charges so we could use in our long-term major maintenance so that our tenants know how much to expect. And it was $200,000 from 2 different contractors, not 700 or what? Yeah, 700,000. It's and the fireproofing. I guess. Yeah, there could be some places where it's falling down. I mean, it's like any sprayed applied thing. But anyway, I just really wished I could have visited with these engineers before they published their reports. But anyway, anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much. Far above my pay grade, so much of this stuff. I think that's probably a universal thought here. But are there specific questions for Joe? Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you, Joe. So a couple questions. When did you get the building? When did you acquire it?
It was 2014 or 15.
2014. And then how many tenants do you have in the building?
Just one.
Just one, and that's the county?
Correct.
And why only one since 2014?
Well, I turned down 2 that would have actually taken 3 floors, hoping that the city would lease the building from me. But that hasn't panned out so good, and now they're down the street about 6 blocks.
Okay, and then how many other potential buyers do you have for the building?
Well, you know, we get calls, but
Any serious?
I mean, we don't have them standing in line, no.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Other questions? Councilmember Perry, then Councilmember Reese, Nice, or
Well, I
Jessica,
guess-
whatever your name is down there.
I guess I would ask, whether Joe can answer this question or Jessica, how typical would it have been for Mr. Holden to have been part of that inspection? Because evidently, like you were talking about the lighting, it was just a matter of turning on the breakers and, did they not figure that one out? So, and that's the other thing is that I've talked with some other people in commercial real estate, and that is the thing with inspectors is that they expect everything to be modernized, everything to be up to code. So to take that into consideration. So would that have been appropriate for Mr. Holden to have been a part of that inspection, the walkthrough?
I walked with them, that was it, but I didn't have any idea what their conclusions were, what they were concluding.
Okay.
And for instance, like on the electrical, where they said that we need to replace all the fixtures in the stair towers, they're 3 years old, they're LEDs, and some of them are not working. They need whatever proper term is, some sort of a starter. And so they're modern. And they do need to be some parts in some of them.
Thank you, Councilmember Nice. No, okay. Anything else for Joe before you can sit down? Don't think so. Thank you very much.
You bet. I would love an opportunity to huddle up with the committee.
There's obviously a lot to talk about.
Okay.
Thank you. by people hopefully a lot more knowledgeable than I think most people sitting up here. I think we're still in public comment, so let's wrap that up, finish that before we go back to general discussion. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on this final item, number 4, the Stillwater Building update, before we close public comment period? Nobody's rushing for the podium, so we'll close the public comment period and back to council. How do we want to proceed? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Kevin, you weren't there in the committee meeting, and maybe I don't want to speak for the committee, so you can tell me if I'm not hearing this right, but I thought we were kind of thinking of 3 different scenarios. One of them, which is not in the 2 options you gave us, was to go back and negotiate, not terminate the contract, but go back and just negotiate. Can you explain why, and you kind of touched on it, but why that wasn't, because I think the committee kind of agreed that was the one we're going to recommend. Why is that not the recommendation of the committee being presented to the council?
Yeah, Mayor and Councilmember Neese, we received that information from, our legal staff today, as far as, it might be cleaner to just go ahead and terminate the agreement rather than negotiate an addendum to it or an amendment to it. So, either way, we're willing to move forward if that's the direction council wants us to go. But they believe, on their legal advice, that it's just cleaner, to kind of start. You wouldn't be starting from scratch because we got a lot of stuff already done and accomplished there. But it would be cleaner in the end, or could be cleaner in the end.
Mayor Pelham, so there's no legal reason why the committee's recommendation couldn't be followed. Is that correct?
Correct, of just doing an amendment or something to the original agreement?
I think that was, if any member of the committee want to fill in, go ahead.
I'm quite troubled by the legal opinion that just came in today. So to me, that is carrying a lot of weight.
Let me just comment. I don't want to speak for Doug James. I didn't talk to Gina, but I did call Doug to make sure that he had seen this report, that he just knew it was out there. He hasn't read it, but he knew it. And my impression was that he would be very concerned that we get what I call accidentally pregnant. We don't want to end up in a contract if we aren't prepared to proceed with the existing terms of the contract. I, for one, am not willing to proceed with a full $17 million purchase price, knowing we're going to have potentially $7 million of additional cost on top of that eventually, subject to Joe's comments that some of those could be reduced perhaps. And then $10 million of build-out costs, and whatever the list comes up to, So he thought, but I'm also not willing to just say we should move on from the Stillwater building. It makes a lot of sense at the right price. So I think his thought was, since September 10th or something is when the due diligence period is closed, we just would not want to miss that deadline to terminate the agreement, and he was skeptical, given the number of issues here, that they could all be resolved in roughly 14 days in one council meeting. So I just don't think he saw it as a practical time period to accomplish all of that. But again, he'd need to speak for himself. Further discussion, Councilmember Neese, you're okay before we move on?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Yakowish, Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Ronning.
So I'd like to direct staff for number 1, if we could go back there, just see where we're at. Terminate the agreement during the due diligence period and negotiate a new agreement based on the inspection findings.
I was going to say the same thing.
Recognize, of course, that's not effective. That's just ask staff to investigate the mechanics of how that would work. Okay. And I'm sorry, did you put in that form of a motion, or
Yes,
you
that was
did?
my motion.
Okay. And the very first bullet point up there, and then Councilmember Shaw made the second. So you have that on the table. Discussion on the motion. Is that still relevant, Councilmember Ronning, to your, because you had your hands up? It is. Okay. All right. So you're in favor of that, I guess, is what it.
Not one bit.
Oh, you're not in.
I'm going to speak against that motion.
Oh, okay. Then, do either of you want to speak in favor of the motion before I hand it to Councilmember Ronning?
Sure, Your Honor and Counsel. I first of all appreciate Mr. Holden. He's been, since 2015, if he did not step in on that building, I think it would be a ghost. And I just commend him and thank him for his effort that way. I would have hoped the presentation was a little bit more clear to me, like good, fair, acceptable, poor. It was a little bit confusing to me, but it is what it is. Likewise, I rely a lot on the committee. The committee's making some statements that I'm in the dark about, not necessarily what Jessica made, but what you guys talked about in your committee. So I'm going to be putting more weight on this committee. You can come out with a recommendation as well. I'll at least give you credit for your talk, all the hard work that you've been doing over the time and hearing things that I haven't heard and coming back with at least a majority vote one way or another. But I feel that we have to go forward. I want to go forward. I want to support this opportunity, at least with the Stillwater building for now, and give more opportunity to discuss it, whether it be in committee or among staff. So thank you.
Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Your Honor, I feel like you kind of nailed a lot of my thoughts, which is that I am not prepared to agree to an extra $7 million, but I'm also not completely prepared to walk away from this. So that's why I like option number one, because I think it gives us more time to explore this a little bit more, see if negotiations can happen, cross our fingers, and if not, then we move on to, option B. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Ronning.
So thank you. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Holden for being here tonight and for working in the manner that you have with the city. So thank you. I realize that I'm the lone person that has been adamantly opposed to this. I fully understand that. So I would just like to go over some points of what we heard tonight. And Councilmember Yakowicz, you said something just in your last statement that but for Mr. Holden, this building would be a ghost. Yikes. And we're wanting to spend almost $30 million of non-voted on by the public dollars. Wow. When we initially sent this out as an RFP, the agreement was, and the vote was, that the funding for this would go on a bond, that the public would vote on whether they wanted to spend these dollars. That's what was voted on by this council. And now this council is not agreeing to that original agreement to the public. That's bothersome to me. We are skipping entirely a public meeting of what the public wants. We're saying only come to a city council meeting. We're saying we're not going to give the public a vote on almost $30 million. When we had council members that went to the state legislature and say no to the $2 million PD1 to maintain city parks that everyone in our city gets to enjoy. As much as this building can be considered enjoyable by the public, the majority of those that are going to benefit from it are going to be city employees. This is not a benefit of the public, so to speak, for $30 million when we're saying we need to go vote for $2 million to maintain our city parks and no vote on $30 million for a building that the public won't actually have total benefit of like they do the parks. We're going to the public for a vote on a public safety mill levy. We went to them for $4 million to repeal and replace last year. Now we're going for just $7 million. This building has been vacant. There's been no one that's in line to get into this building other than what we just heard Mr. Holden say. There's been one tenant, and that tenant wants out. The future is not in brick and mortar. We have learned that in this pandemic. We just heard Nicole talk to us about more businesses going to drive through. What we have learned over and over again in this pandemic is that more businesses are going to technology, not brick and mortar. I have a real problem with the process of this. This has not been publicly transparent. I never even hear. I'm a city council member and I don't hear about the negotiations until right now. This has been done behind closed doors. When we look at new construction, a new building would be less than $10 million more. Less than 10 million. If you're gonna go buy a new car right now, you attempt to buy a used car, which I just attempted to do, that used car, the new car was of more value and about the same amount, just a small, tiny bit investment more. We have a lot of needs. We're looking to say this almost 200,000 square foot building and we want to be a landlord when we've deferred maintenance over and over and over again for our fire stations. We're not willing to pay the maintenance on buildings we currently own, but yet we want to become a landlord for 100,000 square feet more than what the city needs in 10 years. I think we need to be a good landlord to the fire department we have right now. The real needs and what we went out for and what we voted on and what we talked about over and over again is a law and justice center. I think that there are opportunities to do a law and justice center. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for this time. I won't be supporting this motion. My support is for the terminate agreement during the due diligence period and pursue different options to meet facility needs. So thank you.
Thank you. If I can ask a question of staff, presumably Kevin, but maybe Kevin, you could have others comment. Why is there not the third option of terminate the agreement and negotiate a new agreement on the Stillwater building and pursue different options to meet facility needs? All the above category, is that just not, we don't have the bandwidth to, I recognize that, it's a lot of effort and time, but are there other reasons, or can you comment on that?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, no specific reasons, but again, a lot of staff time is going to go into negotiating or renegotiating, a deal if that's the way route Council wants to go. We've always got ears and eyes open for, other things out there, but my personal, recommendation is let's finish up with the Stillwater building one way or the other, and then we can, we'll still have our ears and eyes open during this period if something comes up. But, this has been a 2-year process, or over a 2-year process, and we need to put some finality to it one way or the other at this point.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Neese. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for our legal staff on this, what we're about to direct staff to. What I don't like about this is it appears to me that we're going to renegotiate based upon the inspection findings, not just renegotiate. So if I'm understanding that correctly, I don't mind terminating the agreement based upon the inspection findings, but I don't want to renegotiate based upon just the inspection findings. So I won't support that if all we're going to do is renegotiate based upon the inspection findings. Because one of the things I agree with Penny about is the fact that we initially did take this, say we're going to take this to the vote of the public, and it's a bonding. If we're going to renegotiate, that's going to be part of the negotiations, is bringing this forward, at least a portion of it, to the public for bonding. In my view, that's what I'd like to see us do, and have more public involvement in the process. So I won't support this if that's what the intent of this motion is, to actually just renegotiate just on the inspection report itself. Can you explain to me if that's what this means?
Since this is a work session. You got the one working microphone. Oh, and move the buttons. This isn't the kind that they have when you're in trial. This is a work session, so the direction is towards staff, and the vote would be next week. And the motion to make would be next week. My understanding of the contract, which I have not reviewed, and we have outside counsel that has been working that agreement, is that by terminating the contract and starting over, some of the deadlines within the contract period reset and give the city more time to either make another offer, enter into a new contract, which would extend the times to actually close the transaction. So the language up there that says based on the inspection findings would just be the reason that you're going to terminate the contract. If we're in an option period, you don't have to have any reason to terminate the contract. Again, I have not reviewed the purchase agreement.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know what else we would terminate it for other than that. As far as terminating where we're at now is because of that. But either way, there's a lot of goods about this building, but boy, there's a lot of questions too. And we were already, in my opinion, significantly overpaying for it. And now we're into a suggestion, whether it's half what they say or, the full price. I mean, those are estimated costs. Mr. Holden might be able to go in there and remediate some of that. I don't know. Whatever those negotiations end up as. But I got to say, we need to finish this. We need to finish up with Mr. Holden. We're either interested or we're not. And if we're not, then we'll start going out and see what else is available. But to continually keep reaching out there and looking for something better, the grass is always greener, right? We're either going to pay what the man wants us to pay, or we're not. So my recommendation is we go with the first one. We wrap this up one way or the other. And honestly, I'm fine either way. If we can get it at the right cost, 17 million to me is not the right cost, but if we can get it at the right cost, it makes sense. Because, guys, half that building is going to sit empty for a long time because we don't even want to use it. We've already said we're not going to lease it out to anybody if they aren't working directly with us. So it's literally just sitting there, being heated and everything else. A lot of good, but a lot of questions too. So I really do. I'm going with the proposed. Let's get this thing wrapped up one way or the other, and let's move on. Several years at this, guys.
Thank you. I saw a couple hands. Councilmember Treaky, Councilmember Ewald.
Andy, if we were to bond this entire price, can you give us an estimate as to how much more it would cost us?
Oh, man. Yes, I can, actually. Councilmember Treaky, Mayor, Council. We had prepared for that question. Assuming we borrowed 26 to 28 million, that was the range we were working on. The annual estimated debt payment is 1.75 million, 1,750,000 a year for 20 years. The annual cost to the median residential home is $217,000 as the median residential value is $24.71 a year. The total interest cost over that 20 years would be $10 million. The assumed interest rate of 2.5%. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll make my comment now, if that's okay?
Please.
Sure. So I get the whole thing about, asking the voters about these things, but honestly, if we were to ask the voters whether or not they wanted to pay an extra $10 million in interest in order to buy this thing, I think we know what the answer would be. Frankly, I've been involved in a few purchases of used buildings in the past, and it is absolutely not a surprise to me that the inspectors found something, so what I've always seen happen in this case is we negotiate the findings of the inspection and we move on. So that's where I'm at on this. As for the terminating part of it, I have to pay attention to what the lawyers say. Thank you.
That could be a mistake sometimes. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. So, on that $7 million, if I think when the RFP was initially sent out, it was for purchase or rent or lease. So if that option is still on the table, at least, then that takes that $7 million out of our hands and puts it back on Joe. If Joe is willing to lease and we want to lease, you're not going to find a location downtown in Billings with a parking garage attached to it that would fit the city better than that location right there. So there's other options that we can look at if the 7 million scares you. And I still drop back to the fact that there's nobody that's going to be able to foretell when those boilers go out or when those air handlers go out. They could go out tomorrow or they could last 50 years. So it's a guess, it's a gamble. You're not buying something brand new. And sometimes when you buy stuff brand new, talking about new cars, I've seen a lot of new cars in the shop because something goes wrong with them. So just because you buy new doesn't mean you're not going to have work done on it.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with number one. We need to terminate the contract and renegotiate. If we don't come up with a price we agree with, we move on. Let's just get done with this and move on.
I'll comment. I just want to second really what Councilmember Neese said. I'm uncomfortable tying the city's hands or staff's hands to only negotiating on the Stillwater building. This is always a relative choice. It's kind of a false concept that you can just decide if the light goes on and this is a good deal and then move on. It's only a good deal or a bad deal in light of what your alternatives are. And the alternatives in this case are new construction and another used car, neither of which are part of that first bullet. Admittedly, we don't have people beating down our door either with proposals for cost-effective new construction, nor alternative used cars, as I put it. But now that the price on this one has gone up, those options become more doable. I know I've had at least one complaint by somebody who responded to the RFP for new construction and then never got a call back. And we're not able to enter into any sort of discussion about that at all. And I asked that person, well, could you have built something cheaper than this? And they had to admit no. But that's when we were talking about $87 a square foot for the shell and maybe $10 million for build out. This is different. And of course, if you build new, you don't have those problems. As Councilmember Rewell said, you don't know when these things are going to fail, but they also might fail tomorrow. And so with new construction, that's much, much less likely. So I would still like to know what kind of used cars are out there, what kind of new construction costs are. And if the first bullet is approved, I hope the community will not give up on those options. If people have a good proposal for us, come and sell us on them. Show us how their building would be a really good deal, or that how they could build something in this price range. Of course, if it's new, we would need to pay more because you're getting a different product. But that's what I'd say. I just hope if the first bullet passes, we don't close our ears. And Kevin said we're always open to talk. So I take some encouragement on that. I think I'll vote against this again, just on that point, because I would have a mix that allowed for all of the above. But those are my thoughts. Further discussion, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think this discussion at this council table hasn't really been any different than it was in the committee. All you can say at some point is that you have a known quantity. And you have to, at some point, break off from this. And I absolutely, I like the idea that there could be some different language, but I think we need to finish our business. I think we have some credibility on the line. The next person, if we decide we don't want this and we walk away, at least the next person who responds to an RFP knows that we'll actually follow through and terminate or conclude what we've started. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move to a vote on the motion? Don't want to cut anybody off. And we've still got 4 minutes before our desired 9 o'clock closing time. Okay, if not. So again, the motion is to direct staff to pursue the first bullet on this list. And that, of course, is not a vote to terminate the agreement. That could only happen in a formal business meeting. But this is just to give staff some direction to move in that direction, at least for the time being, until we change our mind, which is always possible, or modify that direction. Is the motion clear before we go to that vote? Okay, so those in favor of the motion, why don't you raise your hand? And that'd be council members Shaw, Yakowicz, Ewalt, Joy, Chiriki, Purington, Boyette, and Brown. If voting in opposition, raise your hand. That's council members Neese, Cole, and Ronning. So the motion passes. Staff, hopefully that gives you the direction that you need. And anything else on this item before we move on to other agenda items? Councilmember Purington.
I'm wondering if it's appropriate during this week, before we do actually vote on this, for Mr. Holden to be able to visit with the inspection engineers to see if that number of $7 million could change. And also, as well as some of the expectations going down the road, you know, just like the elevators or whatever, they're, you know, them saying, well, you need to replace these, and you're going, well, not really. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Holden has made it clear that he would like to participate in that process. So, Kevin, I'll look to you, and feel free to look to other staff. Do you see any reason not to do that or any problems with that?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, we can certainly investigate that possibility. I don't know how open, you know, the inspectors would be for something like that. You know, we paid them to give us this report, give us the estimates, and to do that, but certainly open to talking with some of them. And then I just want to clarify just a couple points. Jessica broke down, you know, we're not saying the elevators need to be replaced tomorrow. I mean, they could last 20 years, but we wanted to have a cost there of what would that cost us if they did break down tomorrow. You know, same with the boilers, you know, all those red line minuses up there. We backed all those out because, you know, we're aware of that elevators could last another 50 years. We just don't know. But I think it'd be remiss of us if we didn't tell council at this point that, yeah, if they break down tomorrow, we're looking at a $780,000 bill to get them fixed. Or possibly get them fixed. I mean, so that was the intent of coming up with that. You know, the total cost is $7 million. And Councilmember Ronning, I just want to clarify a little piece of the RFP in there, because this question came up about, you know, that we would take it to voters. In the RFP, we basically said that the city could require a public ballot issue and process for determining funding methods. So, you know, a little caveat there. And then we never did notify some of the other respondents to the RFP, because when we met with the committee there, the first time, it was, we need to investigate and the Stillwater offer further. So we didn't necessarily take all the other offers off the table or the responses off the table, because in our RFP, we said that this could be a 12 to 30 months, 36 month, you know, to approve a project. And we're still kind of within that window too. So that's why we've never actually responded back to some of the other respondents on the RFP.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing yes in answer to Councilmember Purington's inquiry. Kevin, isn't the obvious way to value these costs to take a proportionate approach? So it's not all or nothing. Say you've got a $1 million expense, and something is 3/4 the way through its useful life. Isn't that cost just 3/4 of that total cost, not the whole cost? And that by doing that, proportionately, we can determine the value of what you're getting versus what you're paying.
Certainly, we could come up with the value of what we're getting based on useful life, but again, we had some of the inspectors indicating that some of the stuff was at the end of useful life, even though it's still, maintained, properly working, everything of that nature. So I think what I'm hearing you say is determining, what's the existing value there compared to what's the replacement cost if things go down. And what we did give you here, Jessica can certainly correct me, was the replacement cost. This is what it's going to cost if this system goes down. What's the value of the boilers, as is today? I don't know. I don't have that number. I don't think Jessica has what the value of the boilers are, but we're just saying if they went down, it's going to cost us this amount of money, to get it back up so we have, heating in the building type of thing.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you very much. Well, Councilmember Ewell, before we move on.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm kind of going along the same lines as you. You probably should be looking at a pro rata type effect on it. You can't say, well, all the stuff they found is worth $7 million, and so we got to figure that it's all going to go out tomorrow. So it's going to cost us $7 million, because I'll guarantee you all that stuff isn't going out tomorrow. It probably isn't all going out in a year's time. And I would almost bet on that, unlike the inspector saying, oh yeah, you got to cover this stuff, but they won't give you a time of when it's going to go out. So how do you know?
Councilmember Ewell, agree with you, on that aspect. And what we tried to break out specifically in that $3.5 million is when we start build out, we're going to start covering up stuff. So we feel it'd be prudent to replace those items at that point because it would cost us more down the line. Even if they are still functioning, still doing that, we think that's a prudent time that we need to make that investment in the upgrades at that point. But again, you're absolutely right with some of the other items, on that list that we could certainly look at. I would think that would be part of the negotiation process.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on then to items of general council discussion before public comment on non-agenda items. Any items of general council discussion? Councilmember Yakovich?
Thank you, Honor. Just real quick, asking Mr. Iflin to follow up with Mr. Friday about the restaurant downtown and the question of building inspectors, going into these buildings and I don't know, telling people one thing and then doing another thing. So he mentioned, Mr. Friday mentioned that he would follow up with that. Secondly,
Councilmember Yakovich, I think we've followed up on that item.
Okay,
and you
I didn't hear back.
Might have got the response, but I think we did respond to somebody else on that. But Jessica could respond.
Yeah, Councilmember Yakovich, I believe I responded to that email. Wyeth had forwarded it to me, and then I got it back over to you regarding that restaurant. So at the time that I finally did get that email, I had met with the owner and we had sorted out the situation. And I know that they went through some frustrations, to put it lightly, in terms of the process. And I don't want to go too deep into exactly what the issues were, but that area with those old buildings, there can be difficult issues that come up. There can be some complicated code implications with those buildings. And if an owner maybe isn't aware of it, or they have a building owner or landlord who doesn't know all the code implications, and I understand the frustrations, and we do try really hard to work with the owners and the contractors and come up with solutions. So by the time that your email did reach me, I had met with her personally and we came up with a solution, and they are now open, so.
Thank you. I haven't heard back from her, so I went and visited her, so she was chewing on me a little bit, but okay, thank you for that. Thank you for, Your Honor, just one other couple. I did get someone asked about the, there's about a dozen, and forgive me, Ward 4 or 5, anyway, they were asking about our ADA ramps. I sent you that email. So I'm not asking you to answer it right now, but there's a dozen ramps. How much do they cost each ramp? Why are they in that location? Came up, someone from the West End Task Force asked me about that. And the other part was on 32nd Street, they're putting a two block, a double sidewalk on 32nd, and he's, or something like that, and asking why not put a 4-lane down 32nd rather than, and I'm sure that costs a lot of money. Who's paying for all that? And with the ADA, who's paying for that too? So I just want to remind you about that.
Yep. Thank you, Councilmember Yakowicz. I did receive your email, and I think Deb Malin and I will get to work on that and try to get you some answers for those questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronnie?
This may or may not be you, this may be a Mayor Cole thing, I don't know. But was there a follow-up with the Billings Gazette that they clarified the inaccuracies in their article regarding the marijuana vote?
I didn't look, I don't know, on the online version.
Yes.
Oh, Councilor Shaw says yes, they did.
In the printed version, they clarified?
I don't know about the printed version, I only know about the online version, but they did post something saying that it had.
Well, the inaccuracies were in the printed version. And I just want to make sure want to find out if they did actually print clarifications on that. Because those inaccuracies were really big inaccuracies.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can get
Okay.
an answer for you
Okay,
on the
thank
print
you.
version.
I would just point out that the Yellowstone County News got it wrong too.
Yes, and I alerted the publisher of the Yellowstone County News and the reporter, and they acknowledged that error, and so they will not perpetuate that going forward. Okay, any other items of general council discussion? Don't see anything, so we'll open it up for public comment on non-agenda items. Anybody like to comment on anything that wasn't on the agenda? Sir, come forward and you get the Patience Award this evening.
Charles, M-O-H-R, and if I didn't spell it, 90% of it, only one person here would spell it right. I live in 5726 Horseshoe Trail, Trail West Subdivision, south of Bensdale Middle School. I travel a lot on 56 through Central Avenue and King. I don't know, it was 3 or 4 years ago, they made them into all-way stop sections. I think before they done it on Central, there was quite a few accidents because if you're going west and you want to go north on 56, there's big growth of trees there. So you have to barely stick your nose out. The speed limit on Central in that area is 50 miles an hour. With the four-way stops, I don't think there's been any accidents. But now, driving here, I seen you want to build a roundabout there. I think some of the places you're crazy about roundabouts. They move traffics and also have a lot of accidents. Because I seen it 3 weeks ago on King and Shiloh, 2 patrol cars and 2 cars that were pretty badly banged up. I don't know what it costs to put in those four-way stops, but I know that it's a lot cheaper than building roundabouts. And on Central and 56, I think that's going to be an expensive roundabout because you've got to remove 6, 8 great big trees, and guys that cut trees, they don't do it cheap. Plus, there's irrigation going down 56. It makes a left turn and goes east on Central. How long is that work going to be? Are the farmers there going to be without irrigation water? Because almost all those farmers there, they got alfalfa, wheat, corn. That keeps their cattle and that stuff fed. So I was just wondering why they're so anxious to build roundabouts.
We don't have our planning director, but your concern is at 56th and Central, is that right?
Yes.
So do we know, is that a county project? I'm not sure that'd be a city project that far out, but I could be wrong. We could check and get back to you. Generally,
I don't know, but I mean,
generally speaking, though, I do know, sir, that there have been a lot of fatalities out there because the problem with those intersections, of course, is you can get T-bones and at full speed where people die. The roundabouts, as you say, do involve a fair number of accidents, especially before people get used to them, you know. but they virtually never result in fatalities. So it's a safety factor, we've been told, oftentimes. But they are more expensive, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I noticed they have this speed limit of 15 miles an hour at the roundabout, but it's black letters on an orange background. That is not a legal speed, that's suggested speed. It's got to be black letters on a white background to be a legal speed limit.
No, haven't noticed that one. Councilmember Puring, that's your neck of the woods, you want to comment?
It is. In discussing with the state transportation department, because it's 62nd and Rimrock, they're planning on putting a roundabout there. And it's my understanding that some of those roads out there are state. The state and the county kind of mix match out there in that farmland. Anyway, whoever is the director of the Montana Department of Transportation he loves the roundabouts and he thinks that they're very safe. And so you're going to get the roundabouts as long as this guy, I guess, is there and he can put his 2 cents in, we'll be getting roundabouts. What I don't like out there is that you have the mix match of 4-way stops and 2-way stops. And to me, that is very dangerous and very confusing. And I agree with the mayor in that you do have to slow down for the roundabouts, but we've had people sailing through those roundabouts and those do produce fatalities. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in about the DOT because that was the explanation I got from them as well.
You might want to follow up with Wyeth Friday in our planning office. He was here, and he could tell you whether that's really a city project or a county project. If it's county, follow up with the county commissioners.
I figured it'd be kind of city because that is city limits. I'm paying city tax. I've got city water, city sewer.
Okay, and it
that's
very well might be.
So,
But it's 56th and Central?
yes,
Okay.
and King. The two of them are, I think, proposed to have roundabouts in them.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Okay. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other public comment on non-agenda items? Don't see anything, so we'll close the public comment period there. Councilmember Yakovich?
I'll follow up with Mr. Orr. I always forget to spell his name. So he is he's a leader, former leader of the Elks Lodge, and I invited him here, so I can claim ignorance that I didn't know if that was city or not, but I will help him follow up. And I just commend him for sitting here through this whole
Yes,
deal.
he does get the Patience Award. Thank you very much. Okay, so we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.